Consciousness returned not in a gentle drift, but as a violent thrust, a spike of agony driven through Leo's left temple, as if someone had hammered a hot nail into his skull. His eyelids scraped open like rusted gates, and the world resolved into a blur of gold leaf and crimson velvet. Every breath tasted of stale incense and something coppery, like old pennies left to rot. He tried to lift a hand to his throbbing head, and that's when he saw the blood. It caked the creases of his palms, dried into jagged brownish maps that flaked as his fingers twitched. Under the nails, too, dark crescents packed with evidence of something unspeakable. A strangled noise escaped his throat, but the sound that came out was too deep, too resonant, nothing like his own reedy office worker tenor. Panic, cold and absolute, seized his spine. He threw aside the heavy silken sheets embroidered with golden serpents that seemed to writhe in the candlelight, and scrambled upright. His bare feet hit marble so cold it burned, and a weight on his brow nearly toppled him. The crown. A monstrous circlet of black iron and rubies, its inner rim padded with sweat-stained leather, dug into his forehead as if it had been welded there for years. He tore it off and flung it onto the bed, where it landed with a sickeningly rich clink. This wasn't his apartment. This wasn't his body. Memories that didn't belong to him flooded in, a dam breaking inside his mind, drowning his own identity in a torrent of otherness. He saw a throne room of screaming petitioners, and a voice like thunder sentencing entire families to the pyre for the crime of a single muttered insult. He felt the visceral ecstasy of signing execution warrants, the way the quill bit into parchment like a lover's teeth. He tasted spiced wine while watching peasants fight starving dogs for scraps of refuse in the courtyard below, felt the smug satisfaction of absolute power corrupting every fiber of a soul named Valerius. Emperor Valerius the Mad. The Butcher. The man history recorded being stabbed 23 times by his own council in exactly 1 week. Leo, no, Emperor Valerius now, lurched to a gilded desk cluttered with scrolls. His foreign hands, still streaked with the remnants of last night's cruelty, snatched up a vellum decree sealed with the imperial dragon. The script was elaborate, but the mind he'd inherited translated it effortlessly, a proclamation announcing a grand victory banquet in the Hall of Eternal Accord, to be held on the 15th day of the moon of reaping. Today was the 8th. 7 days. 7 days until the knives came out, until the 23 wounds bloomed across his chest and back in a rhythm he now knew with horrifying specificity from a half-remembered documentary he'd watched in his past life. His knees buckled, and he only just caught the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing entirely. Despair is a strange thing, it doesn't just weigh you down, it hollows you out, carves a pit in your stomach and fills it with vinegar. Leo, now wearing the skin of a dead man walking, felt that hollow ache spread through his limbs. The emperor's bedchamber, with its vaulted ceilings painted with constellations, its silk-draped walls, its scatter of jewel-encrusted goblets still wet with wine, became a sarcophagus. He was trapped in a gilded tomb, wearing a monster's face, surrounded by courtiers who smiled by day and sharpened their blades by night. Even if he tried to change, to undo the atrocities, would they believe him? Or would his sudden kindness only accelerate their suspicion, move up the timetable of treachery? He scrubbed at the blood on his hands with the hem of his nightrobes, but it had set deep into the lifelines, a brand that no water could wash away. Then, into the crushing silence, came a soft chime, a sound so absurdly mundane, so completely out of place, that it snapped his spiraling thoughts clean in half. It was the little ding of a smartphone receiving a notification. Leo's head jerked up. There, on the marble nightstand beside the gargantuan canopied bed, lay a sleek rectangle of polished obsidian glass, a device that had no business existing in a world of torches and parchment. It hadn't been there before. He was certain of that. The nightstand had held only a carafe of wine and a snuffer earlier, but now the phone sat there like a patient predator, its screen glowing faintly with a soft, golden light. Wariness and a desperate need for distraction warred inside him. Distraction 1. He crossed back to the bed on shaking legs, snatched up the device, and found it terrifyingly familiar, the weight, the curve, the responsiveness as his thumb swiped across a screen that displayed no clock, no carrier, no manufacturer's logo. Only a single app icon remained, centered like a holy relic on a sterile altar. The icon depicted a tiny, idyllic village with a thatched roof cottage, a windmill, and a cheerful pixelated sun. Beneath it, golden letters spelled out RealmCraft. With nothing left but a condemned man's need to fill the suffocating minutes, Leo tapped the icon. The app bloomed open, greeting him not with a login or a tutorial, but with a living diorama of a medieval village that mirrored the empire outside his window in haunting miniature. The colors were soft, storybook pastels, but the sky above the tiny settlement was a churning, unhappy gray. A fat, animated raincloud squatted over the fields, and miserably cute raindrops pattered onto wilted pixel corn. A small banner at the top of the screen read, * weather, perpetual gloom. Crop output, -75%. Citizen happiness, critical, * buttons shimmered at the bottom of the interface, options like, royal decree, festival, blessing, but one glowed brighter than the rest, encased in a ring of golden invitation, sunny day. A tiny sun icon danced beside it, and the cost displayed was simply a modest number of faith points, of which his account held a generous starting balance. Leo's mind, steeped in years of mindless mobile gaming to escape corporate drudgery, immediately categorized this as a farming sim. A cozy, low-stakes game where you tap to make your pretend villagers happy. The real world wanted to kill him in 7 days, but the fake world had sad little crops that just needed some sunshine. The cognitive dissonance was a narcotic. With a reflexive, almost pitying tap, he pressed the sunny day button. A chime, sweeter and more resonant than the first, sang from the phone speaker. The app's raincloud dissolved into sparkles, replaced by a cheery, radiant sun that cast long, warm shadows across the virtual wheat fields. The pixel corn visibly perked up, turning a healthier shade of green. A tiny, celebratory banner unfurled, * sunny day activated. Drought conditions dispelling across your realm, * Leo almost smiled. It was a nice little detail. He even watched as a few tiny NPC villagers emerged from their cartoon cottages to dance in the sunlight. Then the world outside the window detonated. A sound hammered through the palace that was not thunder, not a cannon, but something older and more absolute, the fabric of the sky itself tearing open. The stained glass panels of the bedchamber exploded with radiance, a pure, white gold glare so fierce that Leo threw up an arm to shield his eyes. Fragments of colored glass, depicting the dragon crest of the imperial line, rained onto the marble floor in a crystal chorus. The air, which moments before had been still and thick with the city's stench of smoke and despair, suddenly lashed through the shattered window as a warm, fragrant wind, the wind of a long-delayed spring. Stumbling to the empty frame, his bare feet crunching on broken glass, Leo squinted into the impossible. Beyond the palace's towering obsidian walls, the perpetual gray pall that had smothered the capital city for 16 months was unraveling as though a god's hand had simply rolled it up. Shafts of honest, golden sunlight, not the sickly half-light of the drought, but true, nourishing day, speared down through the dissolving clouds, illuminating a sprawling metropolis that had forgotten the color of a blue sky. And from those distant, sun-painted streets, a sound rose. Not a roar of terror or agony, the kind the Emperor's memories were intimately familiar with, but a roar of something else entirely, disbelief, crystallizing into frantic, hysterical joy. Thousands upon thousands of voices, the voices of citizens who had been watching their children starve, their crops wither to dust, their world die a slow, grey death, screamed not in fear, but in a release so primal it shook the very stones of the palace. The unnatural drought, the curse that scholars had whispered was the god's punishment for Valerius's sins, had shattered like a dropped mirror. Leo watched, the smartphone still clutched in his blood-stained hand, its screen now showing a cheerful village basking in sunshine under a. The gilded doors of the imperial bedchamber slammed open before the echo of the crowd's roar had fully faded. A tide of silk-robed courtiers and armored guards surged inward, their faces twisted into masks of holy terror and bewildered hope. At their head strode High Chancellor Calus, his ceremonial staff of office clutched so tightly that his knuckles showed bone-white beneath the velvet gloves. Behind him, the spymaster Silas moved with serpentine silence, his hooded eyes scanning every corner, cataloging every detail, the rumpled sheets, the dried blood on the floor, the Emperor still standing at the window with his back to them, bathed in impossible sunlight. Divine One. Chancellor Calus threw himself to one knee with the practiced grace of a man who had survived 3 emperors. The assembled nobles followed like dominoes, silks rustling, metals clinking. Forgive this intrusion, but a miracle has unfolded. The great reservoir, empty for 16 months, a cracked bed of mud and bone, has burst forth with water clear as diamond. The aqueducts are singing, the fountains spray gold. The people are weeping in the streets, crying your name. Leo didn't turn around. Couldn't. His eyes were locked on the device cradled in his trembling palms, the impossible rectangle of glass and light that hummed with a life of its own. The RealmCraft app still glowed with cartoon warmth, the pixelated sun now beaming over a village transformed. Where withered brown fields had stretched moments ago, green shoots now dotted the soil. A pop-up notification bounced cheerfully, * sunny day activated. Crops saved. Plus 500 faith points, * and beneath that, a new button had appeared, pulsing with a gentle golden aura, shaped like a sheaf of wheat, blessed harvest, 200 FP, make your fields flourish. Someone coughed. Leo flinched, instinctively jamming the smartphone under a fold of his blood-stained tunic. The fabric reeked of iron and old sweat, his body's memory of atrocities he hadn't committed. Or had he? The foreign memories still sloshed behind his eyes like bilge water. He forced his gaze away from the screen and onto the kneeling crowd. A sea of expectant faces stared up at him, old men with hawk noses, young knights with scarred cheeks, a scribe clutching a scroll that probably detailed how to properly thank a god emperor for ending a drought. He had no idea what to say. Reservoirs? Leo's voice came out as a croak. The original Valerius would have bellowed for executions. Leo just wanted them to leave so he could check if the app had any option to order pizza. Right. Water. Good. I did that. Maybe. Now get out. The Chancellor's powdered brow furrowed. His lips parted, then closed. Spymaster Silas stepped forward, bowing just deep enough to conceal his scrutiny. Your Radiance, the Council requests guidance. This celestial sign will inevitably be linked to the coming victory banquet. Should we announce a week of public celebration? Perhaps a decree distributing the new water? Do, whatever. Festivals, bread, I don't care. Just, get out, all of you. Leo waved a dismissive hand, the motion jerky and unpracticed. The heavy crown slipped, gouging his temple. He caught it with his free hand, wincing. The spymaster's eyes tracked the movement, then darted to the lump beneath the tunic where the phone lay hidden. Chancellor Calus rose slowly, his expression now a careful mask of deference over something brittle. As you command, Divine One. He gestured, and the courtiers began backing toward the doors, bowing with every step. Silas lingered a heartbeat longer, his gaze a cold pressure on Leo's neck, before melting into the shadows of the departing throng. When the last guard pulled the doors shut, the chamber fell silent but for the distant, ghostly cheers still echoing from the city below. Leo collapsed onto the edge of the four-poster bed, gingerly pulling out the smartphone. The screen was warm, the RealmCraft icon a cozy little castle. He tapped it, and the village reappeared. The cartoon peasants were now doing a little dance, hearts floating above their round heads. A banner scrolled across the top, * your people are grateful. Unlock more blessings to expand your village, *. This is insane, Leo whispered to the empty room. The sunshine outside was real. The roaring crowd was real. Somehow, impossibly, this game was linked to the Empire. Or he was hallucinating. A 16-month coma dream. Either way, the app was the only thing keeping the hysteria at bay. He needed to focus on something small, manageable. The golden blessed harvest button pulsed temptingly. The village's fields were still patchy, some stalks drooping. Real-world granaries were probably depleted after the drought. If the game could end a drought, maybe it could fill the silos too. Just a gentle nudge. He tapped Blessed Harvest. The screen erupted in a cascade of little sparkles. Animated grain rippled across the fields, growing tall and golden in seconds. A cheerful chime played. Blessed harvest successful. Granaries overflowing. Population health improved. Plus 300 faith points, Leo smiled for the first time since waking. Cute. The pixel farmers were now stacking huge sheaves of wheat, doing a jig. Far below the imperial spire, in the granite vaults of the capital granary, the ancient iron doors groaned and bulged. Chief Granary Overseer Dorian was in the middle of shaving when the tremor started. His razor clattered into the basin as a deep, subterranean grinding noise filled the stone corridors, the sound of 10,000 tons of grain shifting all at once. He sprinted, half-lathered, into the main storage hall just in time to see the massive oaken silos swell like bellows. Seams split. A tidal wave of golden wheat, barley, and rye burst through the inspection hatches, flooding the floor in a waist-deep river of grain. The air turned thick with dust and the sweet, yeasty scent of sudden abundance. Overseer Dorian stood frozen, beard half-shaved, while a rookie clerk screamed that the scales had snapped their chains. The news hit the merchant's quarter faster than a plague wind. Grain prices, already inflated by drought, plummeted in a single breathless hour. Traders who had hoarded supplies for speculation watched their fortunes vaporize. The sudden, unnatural flood of perfect grain, no rot, no weevils, ignited a different kind of terror. Priests in the temples began preaching of dark pacts and demonic bargains. If a tyrant could command the skies and the fields, what soul-damned power had he truly seized? Panic buying erupted not from scarcity, but from fear, citizens rushed to purchase grain before it turned to ash in their hands, before the emperor's capricious magic twisted it into poison. The markets became screaming mosh pits of flailing elbows and overturned stalls. City guards in dented helms waded into the chaos, wooden clubs flailing, but the mob was a single ravenous animal. Leo saw none of this. He was, instead, perusing the RealmCraft shop tab. The app had awarded him a handful of glittering gold coins alongside the faith points. A new building was available, *Village Apothecary, 150 gold. Strengthen your peasants against hardship. Unlocks mild plague inoculation event, *A little cartoon doctor with a head mirror winked. The description read, *A mild plague makes your villagers hardy and resilient. Some may fall ill, but survivors gain plus 10% disease resistance. Costs 5 gold coins to activate, * Leo considered it. The tutorial pop-ups had hinted that challenges like plagues could strengthen the village long-term. His pixel peasants had just survived a drought and a bumper harvest, a minor illness might be just the thing to toughen them up for whatever winter event came next. He had the coins. It was just a game. A pounding knock rattled the chamber doors. Your Radiance. This time the voice was shrill, cracking. A page boy. There's rioting in the grain market. Thousands fighting. The Lord Commander requests authorization to deploy the Crimson Shields. Leo's thumb hovered over the mild plague button. Rioting? From grain? Why would anyone riot over too much food? His temple throbbed. The real world was intruding again, and he had no solution for a mob. But if he could make the city a little calmer. Maybe a mild sickness would keep people home, stop the riots. The logic was twisted, desperate, but Leo was an office worker who'd once solved a server crash by unplugging a coffee machine. He knew that sometimes a strange problem required a sideways solution. Tell the Lord Commander to wait, Leo shouted toward the door. I'm handling it. He tapped mild plague. The app deducted 5 gold coins with a cheerful jingle. A cloud icon, grayish-green, drifted over the pixel village. Tiny skull symbols appeared over a few peasants, who began to cough in looping animations. Others rushed to their beds. The apothecary building lit up, little bot. The bells of St. Ethelred's tolled without cease. They had been ringing since the physician collapsed, their brazen voices seeping through the granite walls of the imperial bedchamber like a dirge. Leo, Emperor Valerius, huddled against the headboard, the smartphone cold and heavy in his clammy palms. On the screen, pixelated villagers still danced merrily among thatched cottages, untouched by the coughing, bleeding, dying world beyond his door. Court physician Valerin's blood still stained the mosaic floor. Servants had scrubbed at it, but the dark smear remained, a testament to the plague he had unleashed with a single tap. He hadn't meant it. The mild plague had sounded so harmless, so virtual, a way to make his little peasants hardier. Now the palace reeked of vinegar and burning herbs. Distant screams echoed from the city below the Palatine Hill. Leo's stomach churned as he stared at the app. RealmCraft. The name mocked him. He closed the app, opened it again. The golden icon of a smiling sun greeted him, and a new pop-up banner filled the screen. A jester's cap danced across the interface, trailing confetti and sparkles. The text read, Festival of Fools. Unlock for 50 gems. Your villagers need to laugh away their sorrows. Guaranteed morale boost. Leo bit his lip. The last thing the capital needed was more chaos. But the banner's cheerful music, a tinny, looping tune, wormed into his ear. He glanced toward the window, where the plague bells kept tolling. In the game, the little figures stood idle, some with sad icons bobbing over their heads. A village overwhelmed by plague and food riots. His fault. Maybe this festival would fix it. A morale boost couldn't make reality worse. Could it? His thumb hovered. 50 gems. He had exactly 52. Enough. The impulse was too strong, the craving for a simple, happy outcome overwhelming. He tapped. A shower of comedic theater masks fluttered across the screen. The tiny hamlet erupted with miniature bonfires and tiny acrobats. Leo let out a shaky breath. Maybe this was just a game. A coincidence. The plague and the full granaries, strange parallels, but not proof. The court's accusations were madness. He was not a dark sorcerer. He was just a burnt-out office worker playing a farming sim. The bells outside stopped. Silence crashed over the palace like a wave. Leo stiffened. No wailing, no coughing, no frantic footsteps in the corridor. Then, a single flute note rose from the city. Another joined it. A drum. A fiddle shrieking a discordant jig. The air grew thick with the scent of cheap ale and roasted nuts, overpowering the medicinal herbs. Leo crept to the arched window and looked down. The capital writhed. Torches guttered in the dusk, casting jittering shadows over streets suddenly crammed with bodies. People wore masks, crude wooden faces with exaggerated grins, feathered carnival monstrosities, even animal skulls yanked from butcher stalls. They danced. They stumbled. Barrels of wine were rolled into plazas, axes smashed open to let the red tide flow into cupped hands and open mouths. Laughter erupted, not the joyful kind, but a manic, unhinged cackle that scraped the spine. A woman in a moth-eaten gown spun in circles until she collapsed, her mask sliding off to reveal a face slack with ecstatic exhaustion. No one helped her. A parade of fools trampled past, carrying a giant wicker effigy of a king with a crown of straw. Leo's breath fogged the glass. What have I done? The chamber door burst open behind him. He spun, clutching the phone to his chest. A masked servant, a boy with a fox face painted on cheap paper, entered carrying a silver goblet on a tray. His movements were stilted, as if he fought to keep rhythm with unheard music. "Wine from the cellars, your radiance," the boy said, his voice muffled behind the mask. "For the celebration." "I didn't order wine." Leo backed away from the window. The boy's mask tilted, the eye holes empty darkness. Outside, the festival's cacophony swelled. The goblet steamed, a faint bitter almond odor rising from the dark liquid. Leo's survival instinct, honed by a lifetime of dodging bosses' tirades, prickled. The boy set the tray on the mahogany table and retreated with a bow, vanishing through the door before Leo could protest. He stared at the goblet. RealmCraft's screen flickered. The festival banner had vanished, replaced by a sparkling notification, "Lucky escape. A passive boon protects your ruler. Danger narrowly avoided." A warning. Leo's hand trembled. He reached for the goblet, intending to throw it out the window, but his elbow caught the edge of the table. A muscle spasm, unexpected, unnatural, jerked his arm. The tray tipped. Silver crashed to the floor, wine splashing across the marble in a hissing, fizzing puddle. The stench of poison curled into the air, and a section of the mosaic turned black where the liquid ate into the stone. Leo froze, heart pounding. The fox-masked servant had laced his drink. An assassin, using the chaos of the festival. The lucky escape had saved him. The app was real. All of it. The drought, the granaries, the plague, not coincidence. Divine. Or demonic. Screams replaced laughter in the streets, but they were screams of wild abandon, not terror. The festival had swallowed reason. Through the window, Leo glimpsed courtiers from the lower palace, their robes disheveled, dancing with stable hands. The boundaries of rank dissolved. Someone had lit a bonfire in the fountain of the virtuous and was feeding it with scrolls from the treasury archives. A woman in a moth-eaten veil shrieked prophecies from the pedestal of the fallen statue of the empire's founder. The door groaned open again. This time, heavy boots struck the floor, not the soft slippers of a servant. High Chancellor Caelus strode in, his ceremonial cape torn and wine-stained. His silver beard was unkempt, his eyes blazing beneath the ornate diadem of his office. In his right hand, he carried not a scroll but a longsword, the blade catching the orange glow of the distant bonfires. Two of his personal guards followed, halberds dripping with what looked like fresh blood, likely from cutting through the revelers who had stormed the lower levels. "Your radiance," Caelus spat, the title a curse. The city transforms into a madhouse. Plague, then this unholy carnival. My own attendants threw off their livery and joined the dancing. I found the spymaster gnawing on a raw turnip in the council chamber, claiming he was the Queen of Frost. The court dissolves into bedlam, and here you stand, untouched by the madness, staring at that infernal tablet. Leo backed against the window ledge, the phone hidden in his palm. "I didn't." Silence. The High Chancellor leveled the sword at Leo's chest. The blade trembled with Caelus's fury. "For weeks, you have surrendered governance to whims. You end a drought, then unleash famine riots. You bring plague, and now this festival of fools. No mortal emperor wields such capricious power. You are in league with dark forces. Admit it." The guards fanned out, halberd points gleaming. The cacophony outside rose to a fever pitch. A parade of masked figures danced past the chamber door, and one, wearing the fox mask of the servant boy, paused to peer inside. The boy's eyes widened with manic glee, then he continued his jig down the corridor, leaving a trail of bloody footprints. Leo's mind raced. The app was real. The lucky escape had just proven it. He was responsible for all of it. The plague, the festival, the poisoning attempt. He had been a fool playing a game, and now the empire burned. Kaelus's sword point was level with his heart, and the chancellor's knuckles were white. If Leo admitted the truth, they would kill him as a sorcerer. If he denied it, the chaos would speak for itself. The Overthrow countdown on the app's hidden menu, he had glimpsed it before, was likely ticking towards 0. He had to survive. He had to get back to the screen and undo this. Divine punishment was still an option, but not yet. He needed time. Leo raised his chin, forcing a calm he didn't feel into the tyrant's voice. High Chancellor, you draw steel in the imperial presence. That is treason. Kaelus laughed, a bitter sound that mingled with the city's madness. Treason? Look outside. The empire drowns in sorcery and you speak of treason? The council meets at dawn. You will answer to us, or I will carve the confession from your lying throat myself. Guards, secure the emperor in this chamber. Let the dark spirits he worships try to free him. The guards advanced, but a fresh wave of screams tore through the palace, not manic revelry now, but panic. A stampede of costumed courtiers fled past the corridor, shouting of a fire in the east wing. The distraction gave Leo a breath. Kaelus cursed, sword still aimed. This isn't over, Valerius. When the sun rises, you will face judgment. He retreated with his men. The heavy oak doors of the imperial bedchamber boomed shut with a finality that vibrated through Leo's bones. The iron bolt slid into place with a shriek of rusted metal, a sound that had once belonged to a world of smartphones and overnight deadlines, but now echoed in the vast, cold stone of a palace that wanted him dead. His heart still pounded from the moments before, the splash of wine on marble, the sizzle of poison eating through the floor, and High Chancellor Kaelus's face, twisted with righteous fury, calling him an agent of dark forces. Leo backed away from the door until his shoulder blades met the carved headboard of the monstrous four-poster bed. Silk sheets tangled around his shaking hands. Outside the tall arched windows, the city was a cacophony of drunken song and shrieking laughter, the festival of fools still roaring through the capital's veins. Masks and torches flickered past the wrought iron balustrade. Someone screamed with either joy or terror, it was impossible to tell. This is real, Leo whispered. The words tasted dry, like dust. It's all real. He fumbled in his heavy brocade coat, fingers searching for the impossible rectangle of glass and light that had no business existing in this world. The divine smartphone slid into his palm, cool and smooth. Its screen flickered awake, the cheerful logo of RealmCraft blooming, a smiling sun over a thatched cottage. It was so jarringly cute, so horribly innocent. With trembling digits, he tapped the icon. The game loaded. His virtual village sat bathed in golden sunlight, pixelated peasants dancing around a maypole, while in the corner of the screen, a twinkling icon announced the Feast of Fools in bright pink letters. Just below that, the other notification, Plague Outbreak. A small banner of greenish vapor drifting over the little houses. And in his real world, the palace wings were locked down with coughing courtiers and the capital streets filled with delirious, plague-susceptible revelers. Leo's stomach contracted violently. He had done this. 50 gems for the festival, a tap for the sunny day days ago, and a mild plague. He had thought it would make his pixel peasants hardier. Now the real empire was drowning in chaos. He needed to undo it. He had to. He tapped on the plague outbreak icon. A dialog box appeared, cancel plague event. Cost, 300 faith points. Leo's eyes darted to the top right corner of the screen. Faith points, 17. He had spent them all, recklessly, joyfully, when he thought this was just a game. The plague had cost him 200 to activate, the festival 50, and the sunny day a handful more. He had never checked the balance. Now the cost to reverse was more than triple. No, no, no. He stabbed at the festival icon. Cancel Festival of Fools. Cost, 150 faith points. Still too much. He swiped the screen wildly, searching for anything, any emergency button. The interface showed a menu, weather, events, structures, faith. He opened the weather tab. Under, current weather, chaotic revelry, event override, the options listed, sunny day, 10 FP, rain, 5 FP, calm weather, 3 FP. Calm weather. 3 faith points. That was barely a drizzle. But outside his window, the mob was a living beast, heaving against the palace gates. If that mob broke in, the assassination wouldn't wait for the banquet. He could die right here, locked in his own bedroom. He pressed calm weather. A warm, soft chime emanated from the phone. The screen showed a gentle breeze sweeping through the virtual village, the maypole dancers slowing, blinking sleepily, then wandering off to their huts. The torchlight in the real world, visible through the window, seemed to shudder. The drunken screaming started to hollow out, replaced by confused murmurs. Leo stumbled to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Below, in the great courtyard, hundreds of masked figures were stopping mid-step, their waving torches lowering. A man in a fox mask dropped a jug of wine. Another in a crow mask yawned so wide his mask slipped. The frenetic energy bled away, replaced by a drowsy, bewildered silence. Guards, who had been holding a barricade with drawn swords, looked at each other in disbelief. "It's working," Leo breathed. A fragile hope flickered in his chest. Then, like a bucket of ice, the realization followed, every tap, every tiny change, was rearranging the fabric of reality. The phone was not just predicting events. It was dictating them. He backed away from the window, knees weak. He stretched out an arm and sank onto the bed, the mattress groaning under his weight. He needed to understand the limits. With a frantic, almost feverish motion, he began navigating deeper into the app's menus. In the bottom corner, a tiny globe icon caught his eye, something he had always ignored because it seemed like just a decorative background toggle. He tapped it. The screen expanded into a sprawling map, rendered in a charming, hand-painted style. There were forests, mountains, winding rivers, and dotted cities labeled in adorable script. His virtual village was marked by a golden crown. Leo's breath caught. He traced a river with his finger, the River Ansel, he realized, the very one that flowed past the palace's eastern wall. He zoomed out, and his blood ran cold. The shape of the continent, the placement of the mountain ranges, the coastal outline, it was the Empire of Valdris. His empire. The map in his old study, the one he had glimpsed while trying to find the privy, was an exact match for this cartoony rendition. But here, on his phone, icons showed drought-affected fields in the south, where his sunny day tap had ended a real drought, then perhaps overcorrected. No, the disaster had been before. He didn't know anymore. There were small plague icons, too, clustered around the capital, exactly where the disease had broken out. And the star icon of the Festival of Fools was pulsing over the city. Leo's fingers shook over the screen. He touched the drought region. A pop-up read, Southern Province, fields recovering. Population grateful. Faith +5. He had gained faith from ending a drought. But then he had spent it on plagues and riots. The irony was a physical ache in his gut. A sudden, deliberate knock at the door made him almost drop the phone. He shoved it into his coat, the screen dimming but not locking. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice cracking. "Emperor," came a deep, uncertain voice. "The mob's gone quiet. The High Chancellor sent orders to keep you secure, but the captain of the watch is asking what you did." It was one of Kaelus's guards, still posted outside. Through the wood, Leo could picture him, helm visor down, sword trembling with confusion, not terror. A pause, then the guard added, almost pleading, "There was a calm wind just now. Came from nowhere. The priests are saying it's an omen." Leo didn't answer. He was staring at the phone screen, which had returned to the main village view. But now, at the very top of the screen, directly under the resource bars, something new had appeared. A black banner unfolded with a hiss that made the phone vibrate. Golden letters seared onto the glass. Overthrow event. Below the text, a clock-like icon materialized, a silver ring encircling a slowly ticking hand, surrounded by 13 tiny gem markers, only 6 of which still glowed. A number began to count down, burning itself into Leo's retina. 6D 4 hours 31 minutes and 12 seconds. 6 days. 4 hours. Leo couldn't breathe. The counter was the sound of a blade being sharpened, the beat of a drum leading to an execution. The banquet. The grand banquet where history said Emperor Valerius would be stabbed 23 times by his own council. This was the countdown to his assassination, and he was sitting here with 17 faith points and a plague-ridden city. The guard knocked again. Your Majesty. Leo's reflection in the dark glass of the window showed a ghost, a terrified office worker wearing the face of a doomed tyrant. Down below, the last of the drunkards stumbled away into the shadows, the calm weather dissipating the festival's grip. But the silence that replaced it was even worse, the silence of a realm holding its breath, waiting for the final act. And in his palm, the little clock ticked away, each second slicing off another sliver of his future, while RealmCraft's cheerful music played softly, oblivious, demanding more faith to turn the tide. The candle on the bedside table guttered, casting long, wavering shadows across the gilded frescoes of the imperial bedchamber. Emperor Valerius, or rather, the man who now inhabited his body, Leo, sat hunched at the edge of the vast canopied bed, the silken sheets pooled around him like a cold sea. The smartphone's screen was the only true light in the room, its gentle blue glow etching deep lines of exhaustion and terror onto his borrowed face. The RealmCraft app was still open. Above the cheerful, deceptively bright cartoon map of his empire, a new element had pushed everything else aside. The Overthrow event timer had enlarged itself, pulsating with a soft, rhythmic throb, as if the app itself had a heartbeat. The countdown read, 6 days, 3 hours, 52 minutes. Each second ticked away with a barely audible click from the phone speaker, a metronome counting down to his death. Leo's thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. He had seen this kind of interface before, in the countless gotcha games and strategy apps he'd used to escape his old life. There was always a detail screen, a way to drill down. He touched the timer. Immediately, the display shifted. The map dissolved, replaced by a crisp, parchment-textured scroll that unfurled with a soft, digital rustle. At the top, in an elegant script that felt far too ornate for a farming sim, was the title, Root Cause Analysis, The Overthrow of Emperor Valerius. Below it, a list of names, each accompanied by a tiny, remarkably detailed portrait, almost like a Western-style wanted poster. The conspirators. His breath caught. There were 3 primary entries, their portraits larger, their names glowing a faint, ominous crimson. First, High Chancellor Aldrich. The miniature face stared back at him with cold, calculating eyes set in a gaunt, patrician face. Leo's mind scrambled for a memory from this body's past, and a fragmented image surfaced. Aldrich, a week ago, standing in the council chamber, his face a mask of suppressed fury as Leo, in his first hour of panicked rule, had issued a decree. What was it? A festival. The Festival of Fools. He'd tapped it because the colorful icon of jesters and dancers looked fun, a distraction from the terrifying reality of his transmigration. The memory sharpened, he'd ordered it without consulting the council, and when Aldrich had politely inquired about the treasury's allocation, Leo had laughed it off, saying, "It's just a game. Lighten up." The High Chancellor's expression had petrified into that very portrait. Second, Spymaster Kalen. The portrait showed a man of shadows, literally, the miniature artist had rendered him with a hood pulled low, only a knowing smirk and a single, piercing eye visible. Leo recalled a different encounter. He'd found a plague option in the app, thinking a mild sickness would toughen his pixelated peasants. The next day, the spymaster had requested an audience to report on a sudden, unexplained illness sweeping through the palace servants. Leo, terrified of exposure, had dismissed him with a wave of his hand, claiming it was just bad humors and that the gods would provide. The spymaster's eye had narrowed, and he'd left without a word. The portrait's smirk now seemed a foretelling of the knife. Third, Royal Treasurer Voren. A plump man with a perpetually worried forehead and a ledger clutched to his chest. Leo remembered the drought. He'd tapped Sunny Day to give his crop some light, and the empire's year-long dry season had abruptly, impossibly, ended with a deluge. But the treasury had already been stretched thin. Voren had come to him with reports of bankrupt granaries and merchants demanding compensation for the sudden crop surge that had collapsed grain prices. Leo, his head still full of spreadsheets from his old job, had merely grunted, "Diversify their assets," and turned back to his phone. Voren's ledger had slammed shut with a finality that now echoed through time. Leo stared at the 3 portraits, his stomach churning. He had slighted them. Not out of malice, but out of a profound, catastrophic ignorance. To them, he was a mad king, issuing bizarre decrees that wrecked the economy, sowed disease, and mocked their council. Of course they were plotting to kill him. His thumb scrolled down. There were other names, minor barons and disgruntled military officers, but these 3 were the architects. And below the list, a small, blinking icon shaped like a stylized third eye. The label read, Oracle of Fate, peek into the threads of what is to come. Cost, 14 faith points. Leo's eyes flicked to the top right corner of the screen. His faith points counter glowed softly, 14. Precisely enough. A wave of cold horror washed over him. The app, this divine joke, was playing him. It had left him just enough to see, but not enough to act. The divine punishment button he'd glimpsed earlier was still grayed out, its cost an unimaginable 150 faith points. Canceling the overthrow event required 200. He was a pauper facing a king's ransom. He thought of the knife wounds, 23, history had said. 23 stabs, delivered by men who had once knelt before him. The full weight of his impossible situation pressed down, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. He needed to know more. He needed to see. His thumb pressed the oracle icon. The phone vibrated violently, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to travel up his arm and into his very bones. The screen went black, and then a pinpoint of light appeared, expanding rapidly, consuming his entire vision. The bedchamber vanished. He was no longer holding the phone, he was inside the vision. He stood in the council hall. The vast marble chamber was lit by flickering braziers, their smoke twisting into the shadows of the high, vaulted ceiling. He felt himself in his emperor's garb, the heavy golden stole pressing on his shoulders. Before him were the conspirators. Aldrich, Kalen, and Voren stood in a loose semicircle, their hands clasped before them in a mockery of deference. Their faces were serene, but their eyes glinted with anticipation. He tried to speak, to move, but the vision held him in a fixed path, like a character in a cinematic cutscene. "We have gathered for your final decree, your majesty," Aldrich's voice echoed, flat and toneless. Leo heard himself respond, a line he never consciously chose. "The decree is simple, death to all traitors." It was arrogant, the voice of the true Valerius, and utterly suicidal. Then, motion. Kalen was the first. He glided forward, his robe billowing, and from his sleeve a narrow, leaf-shaped blade emerged. The pain was a white-hot lance in his side. Leo tried to scream, but the vision had no sound for his own voice. Voren was next, a heavier man thrusting with a ceremonial dagger that shone gold in the brazier light. More figures swarmed in from the edges of his vision, the minor names from the list, faces now contorted with hatred. The stabs came in quick succession, each a distinct, separate agony. He counted them, helplessly, a detached observer in his own dying body. 1. 2. 5. 12. The floor rushed up to meet him, cold marble slick with his own blood. 21. 22. 23. The final blade, a dull kitchen knife buried into his chest, came from a servant boy he didn't recognize. The vision went dark, but the pain lingered, a phantom ache that throbbed in time with the phone's relentless pulse. The scene shattered, reforming. He was at a grand banquet table. It was impossibly long, draped in velvet the color of dried blood. Golden plates and crystal goblets glittered under the light of 1,000 candles. The conspirators were seated around it, their finery immaculate, their glasses raised in a silent, mocking toast. And then, his gaze, the camera of the vision, panned across the table. Dish after dish was laid out in sumptuous display, roasted peacock with feathers reattached, whole suckling pig with an apple in its mouth, glazed pastries, pyramids of exotic fruits, and a tureen of gleaming silver soup. But each dish shimmered with a faint, oily iridescence, a subtle sheen that whispered of poison. A delicate, caramel-coated dessert was dusted not with sugar, but with a fine, crystalline powder. The wine in the goblets was a shade too dark, too thick. He counted them. The same compulsion drove him. 1 poisoned dish. 2. 7. 15. 23. Exactly 23. The number echoed through the silent hall like a death knell. The last dish was a simple loaf of bread, its crust cut open to reveal a greenish-black mold baked into the very center. Placed directly before the emperor's empty seat. The fear points counter on his app, which had somehow overlaid itself onto the vision, flashed a frantic 0. The vision began to fracture, the edges curling like burning parchment. The last thing he saw was Aldrich's face, turning toward the empty throne, his smile widening int. The first light of dawn bled through the high-arched windows of the imperial bedchamber, painting streaks of pale gold across the marble floor. Leo sat hunched on the edge of the vast canopied bed, the divine smartphone clutched in both hands, its screen casting an unnatural luminescence over his haggard features. The overthrow event timer pulsed in the corner of the display, a malevolent crimson counter that now read 6 days, 4 hours, and 12 minutes. He had not slept. The vision the oracle had seared into his mind, the banquet table, the poison chalices, the cold steel biting into his flesh 23 times, replayed behind his eyelids every time he blinked. He needed to act. The oracle had given him names, faces, motives: High Chancellor Aldrich, the dignified old snake whose pride had been flayed by the Festival of Fools; Spymaster Kalen, the Shadow Weaver whose warnings Leo had ignored; Royal Treasurer Voren, whose meticulously balanced ledgers had been thrown into chaos by the Emperor's whims. 3 vipers coiled at the heart of his court. But the phone offered a path, a way to tilt the board without overt violence. He just had to be clever. His thumb trembled as he navigated the RealmCraft interface. The usual cheery pastoral music was muted, the app seemed to sense his desperation, its colors dimmer than before. He opened the Nobility Management tab, a feature he had barely glanced at during his first bewildered day as Valerius. A web of gilded filigree lines connected dozens of portrait icons: dukes, counts, barons, and knights, all arranged in hierarchical clusters. Their names hovered in ornate script, their loyalty levels displayed as tiny golden hearts that were mostly half full or cracked. He zoomed in on the 3 conspirators first. Aldrich's portrait showed a thin-faced man with silver hair and cold eyes, his loyalty heart a deep, pulsing red with a tiny dagger icon superimposed. Leo tapped it, and a soothing chime sounded as a menu unfurled: options for gift, flattery, summon, and a soft glowing button labeled Loyalty Boost. He pressed the boost, his heart thudding with fragile hope. A jagged red banner slashed across the screen, accompanied by a dissonant twang that made him flinch. The words glowed like hot iron: plot armor detected, this character is integral to an active narrative event. Direct manipulation is forbidden, *** below, in smaller text, a note: modifications must arise from organic world interactions. Leo swore under his breath and tried Kalen. The same warning. Voren. Identical. The app was treating the conspiracy like a sacred storyline, an immutable spine of fate that he could not simply edit away with a tap. Frustration coiled in his chest, hot and acrid. He threw himself back against the pillows, the phone bouncing on the silk sheets. Sunlight crept further across the floor, and somewhere in the palace, a servant's distant footsteps echoed like a death knell. He couldn't touch the ringleaders, but what about the threads around them? The web of nobility was vast. If he strengthened the minor houses, the lesser lords and ladies who might be swayed to his side, he could weave a net of loyalty that even the conspirators couldn't cut through. He grabbed the phone again and scrolled past the gilded high houses to the simpler crests at the edges of the chart. Baron Alara Vexley of the River March, her portrait was weary, a woman in her 40s with windburned cheeks, loyalty heart a thin sliver of gold. Count Thalen Westmere, a younger man, dark-skinned, eyes sharp with ambition, his loyalty hovering at neutral gray. Lady Seraphine of House Thornwood, ancient, stooped, her loyalty level a fractured shell. These were the edges of the empire, far from the glittering poison of the capital. If he could tip their scales, perhaps the conspiracy's foundation would crack. He tapped Baron Vexley's loyalty boost. A new window appeared, demanding 2 faith points and 50 gold. Leo checked his resources. Gold, a respectable 1,200 coins, accrued from whatever passive income the app siphoned from the imperial treasury. Faith points, a dead, hollow 0. The oracle had devoured the last 14. And their prayers were generating faith points. The faith gauge now read 11. Not enough for a divine miracle, but enough for small, insidious nudges. Leo's fingers moved before his mind could fully process the moral quagmire. He tapped Baron Vexley's loyalty boost again. The app chimed sweetly, and a soft golden glow enveloped her portrait. 2 faith points vanished. A new notification: Baron Alara Vexley experiences a sudden surge of unshakable loyalty to the crown. Cause, a vivid dream of the Emperor's divine radiance, ***, she was now flagged as a potential ally. He did the same for Count Thalen, spending 3 faith points to nudge him from grey to a cautious gold. A tooltip noted the cost was higher due to the Count's ambitious nature. Then Lady Seraphine, her ancient loyalty rising from fractured to half full with a single expensive tap that drained the last of his faith. As each minor noble shifted, the web on the screen rippled, small golden lines thickening and spreading outward like capillaries under the skin of the empire. But the game was still listening, still enforcing its cruel narrative balance. A new alert popped up, bordered in ominous violet: cultural event triggered, religious schism, the cult of the fickle god. Below it, a description scrolled in elegant script: the rapid, unexplained loyalty of minor nobles has not gone unnoticed. Common preachers now proclaim the emperor as a divinity whose favor must be courted through public penance. Orthodox clergy decry this as heresy, sparking riots in 3 provincial towns. The schism deepens, Leo's stomach clenched as a secondary bar appeared on the overlay, societal stability, -12%, he had tried to mend the cracks, but his meddling was tearing the empire's soul in two. He could not control the consequences. Everything he did spawned chaos like wildfire from a single spark. The phone hummed again, and the overthrow timer suddenly shuddered. The numbers blurred, accelerated, 6 days, 4 hours became 5 days, 22 hours, and then, without warning, snapped down to 4 days, 12 hours, and 7 minutes. A full day and a half had been devoured, as if the conspiracy itself was feeding on the growing disorder. Aldrich, Kalen, and Voron would not wait for a broken empire, they would strike while the people burned each other in the streets. Panic sent ice through Leo's veins. He fumbled with the screen, searching for any option, any hidden button that might reverse the damage. The religion tab now showed the schism spreading like dark ink in water. The nobility tab showed his 3 key conspirators entirely unchanged, their plot armor a gleaming wall of crimson. The faith gauge was empty again. He needed more power, more faith, but the only source seemed to be terrified peasants who thought his every sneeze was a sacred omen. And then the phone exploded with light. A pure, searing white radiance erupted from the screen, blinding him and forcing him to shield his eyes with one arm. The scent of ozone filled the bedchamber, sharp and electric. When the glare faded to a tolerable glow, Leo lowered. The royal chambers had become a gilded cage. For days and 12 hours glowed on the phone's screen in pale, accusatory light, each digit a heartbeat closer to a banquet of steel. Leo, still cloaked in the unfamiliar weight of an emperor's body, stared at the icon that had bloomed from the blinding flash, divine punishment. 10,000 faith points. The number loomed as vast and unreachable as the moon. His fingertip hovered, but the counter stubbornly held at a pathetic 174. The trickle of devotion from the cult of the fickle god was not enough, not nearly enough. He needed more than faith, he needed facts. The oracle's vision had shown the traitors' faces but not the place. The banquet could be anywhere, a hidden ballroom, a private manse, the depths of the palace itself. If he was to survive, he had to find it, and the answers would not be whispered in the hall of daggers he called a court. Leo navigated the RealmCraft app, past the familiar village management tiles, past the newly unlocked global event icon that pulsed with a celestial menace. He scrolled through categories he'd barely explored, cosmetics, buffs, local interactions. His thumb paused over a tiny, unassuming mask icon labeled Disguise Self. The faith point cost was negligible, almost laughable, a single point for an hour's illusion. He tapped it, and the screen flared with a soft, iridescent light. A tingling sensation crawled across his skin, not painful, but strange, as though he were momentarily submerged in cool water. When he lifted his hands, they were calloused, the hands of a laborer, not an emperor. A glance at the polished silver mirror sent a jolt through him. The sharp, angular features of Valerius had softened into a nondescript, weary merchant's face, with a slight stoop and hair the color of dried mud. The transformation was seamless. The weight of the imperial signet ring remained on his finger, but hidden by a simple leather glove the illusion provided. He pulled a coarse woolen cloak from the back of an armoire, a relic of some forgotten diplomat, and drew the hood low. The palace corridors, normally a labyrinth of pomp and protocol, felt alien now. He slipped through a servant's passage, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs for the first time since the transmigration. This was no tap on a screen, this was walking into the maw of his own terrified empire. The city of Veridan spilled from the palace gates like a tarnished jewel. The broad avenue of saints, usually bright with merchant banners and the chatter of 1,000 haggling voices, lay under a shroud of uneasy silence. Shutters were barred on second-story windows. The few carts that creaked through the cobbled streets were driven by gaunt men who flinched at every shadow. Leo walked, and he saw. A baker's shop, its ovens cold, had a crude wooden sign that read, "Closed by the Emperor's plague." The words were smeared with a palm print, as if someone had tried to wipe them away in despair. A thin child, no older than 7, crouched in the gutter, drawing shapes in the dry dust with a stick, her ribs visible through her tattered shift. Further on, a small fountain that had once burbled with clean water was now a cracked basin, its statue of the city's founder draped in a garland of wilted, brown flowers. A cluster of citizens knelt before it, not praying to the old gods, but murmuring a strange, rhythmic chant, "Capricious Lord, test us not with another son, but with the rain of your mercy." The cult of the fickle god had taken root not in temples, but in the cracked earth of a drought he had accidentally ended and a plague he had foolishly started. The irony was so sharp it cut his breath short. He had only wanted a sunny day for his pixelated beetroot, they had suffered a year of desolation. He pulled the hood tighter and moved on, the guilt of physical stone in his gut. The app wasn't a game, it was a god machine, and he was a clumsy, terrified amateur at the controls. But self-pity would not save him. He unfurled a scrap of parchment he had secreted from the palace's forgotten records, a list of the previous Imperial Guard rotation, names the spymaster had likely purged from the official logs. One name, Salas Drath, had a notation, discharged for dereliction, 3rd Ward. The 3rd Ward was the city's poorest quarter, a warren of tenements that leaned together like drunken soldiers. The stench hit him first, rot, cheap tallow, and the metallic tang of desperation. Here, the drought's memory was a fine, powdery dust that coated everything. Leo navigated the alleys, his merchant's guise allowing him to pass where an emperor would be a red target. He found the address, a sagging tenement with a door that hung by a single hinge. Inside, on a straw pallet, lay a man who had once been a pinnacle of imperial strength. Salas Drath was a ruin. His left leg was a swollen, blackened mess, the wound poorly bandaged with strips of a dirty tunic. His face, beaded with sweat, twitched in a fever dream. Leo knelt, the illusion flickering for a heartbeat as his concentration wavered. He palmed the smartphone, its glow illuminating the squalid room. The local encounter tab blinked, identifying the man as a neutral NPC with historical intel. Options cascaded, eavesdrop, interrogate, heal wound, 15 faith points, truth serum buff, 10 faith points, dot. A combined option, assisted revelation, pulsed for 22 faith points. Leo's current balance was 174, the cost was paltry. He selected heal wound first, drawing his finger in the app's prescribed pattern. A warm, golden light seeped from the screen, not a dramatic beam, but a gentle effervescence that sank into the man's leg. The swelling receded before Leo's eyes, the angry black veins retreating like a receding tide. The foul smell of infection gave way to the clean scent of rain-washed herbs. Salas gasped, his back arching, eyes flying open. They were the pale blue of a winter sky, clouded with pain. Before the man could scream, Leo tapped truth serum buff. A different light, a cool, lavender luminescence, settled over Salas's brow. His panic melted into a dazed calm, his gaze locking on Leo's disguised face with an unnatural, trusting lucidity. The app's buff description was simple, target will speak only factual statements for 5 minutes. I served faithfully, Salas whispered, his voice a dry rasp. I saw the spymaster's man placing the draft in the High Chancellor's own wine to test its potency. I was meant to be the scapegoat. They stabbed me and threw me here to die, thinking I'd take the secret. He coughed, a little life returning to his limbs. The banquet, it's not in the palace. The Chancellor was too clever for that. He's rented the old Caliph family hunting lodge in the Emberwood, 3 miles north of the city wall. They'll take a hidden tunnel from the wine cellars of the Rose Quarter to avoid the gates. The Emberwood. A secluded forest lodge. It made perfect, terrible sense, a place to murder an emperor without the city's prying eyes. Leo's mind raced. When? He asked, his own voice foreign in the merchant's disguise. 7 days from your last public address, that would be 4 sunsets from tonight, Salas said, the numerical certainty of the truth serum rendering his tone strange and flat. The signal for the citywide coup to begin will be a red rocket fired from the lodge's watchtower. Leo's blood ran cold. The overthrow timer aligned perfectly. He had a location, a signal, a fragment of the puzzle. Thank you, he breathed, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised him. Salas's lucidity began to fray, the buff's timer waning. His brow furrowed. Who are you? But the answer came not from Leo, but from the street outside, a rhythm of hobnailed boots, too crisp and coordinated for any city watch. A harsh voice boomed, in the Chancellor's name, clear the den. The fugitive Salas Drath is to be taken alive. The tenement walls seemed to shrink. Leo cursed under his breath. The Chancellor's network had eyes even in the filth of the 3rd Ward. He moved to the grimy, oil-paper window and peered through a tear. A dozen soldiers, their breastplates bearing the Chancellor's personal crest, a coiled viper, had fanned out to encircle the building. They were not the Imperial Guard, these were Aldrich's household troops, his private knives. The smartphone screen flared violently, the disguised self-timer dropping to under a minute. A new alert window sprang open, its borders a frantic, pulsing red. Local encounter, treachery's net. Hostile faction *High Chancellor's retinue, 12 soldiers, 1 mage adjutant. Imminent action * building sweep. Choices * 1. Combat stance, expend 50 faith points to manifest, divine wrath, minor, a localized smite that will reveal your identity but clear the immediate threat. 2. Stealth and evasion, expend 5 faith points for smo. The tenement alley collapsed into a dead end of wet brick and rotting crates. Crossbow strings creaked from 3 directions, rooftop, street corner, the towering mouth of the passage where soldiers in royal crimson plate fanned out like a closing jaw. The cosmetic filter's shimmer had dissolved mid-stride, leaving Leo exposed in the stolen merchant's cloak, his true face raw under the torchlight. Salas Drath slumped against the wall behind him, his freshly healed wound still weeping pink serum, breath a ragged whistle. "Halt, in the Emperor's name," the sergeant bellowed, but the voice cracked with unease. These men were not palace guards, they were city watchmen, conscripts with padded gambesons and hollow cheeks, yet their crossbows gleamed with Aldrich's gold. A rooftop archer steadied his aim, the bolt's tip winking like a cold star. Leo's fingers found the smartphone before his mind could fully catch up. The screen flickered through the ghostly overlay of RealmCraft's interface, the familiar golden sun icon pulsing softly, but no weather spell could save him now. His faith counter blinked crimson at the corner, 247 points, a pittance scraped from the chaos of the past days. The app quivered, its UI swirling into a combat-oriented mode he'd never triggered before. A new panel slid upward, overlaying the alley's grim geometry, local encounter, hostile forces. 3 options glowed beneath it, combat, stealth, diplomatic bluff, all grayed out, their faith costs surging beyond his reserves. Then a 4th icon bloomed from the dimness, one he had never noticed. It was a simple golden shield, etched with the faint outline of a wheat stalk, as if some long-dead designer had buried a cheat code inside the farming sim. The label read Divine Shield, cost, 200 faith. Effect, nullifies all incoming projectiles for 15 seconds. Leo's thumb hesitated, hovering over the screen, his mind flashing to the empty fields and plague-ridden villages his earlier taps had wrought. But the twang of a crossbow string shattered that thought. He tapped. The world turned to light. A dome of translucent gold erupted from his chest, expanding like a sunburst caught in amber. The first bolt struck the barrier 3 inches from his nose and vaporized, not deflected, not broken, but unmade into a spray of glittering motes that smelled of ozone and old incense. 2 more bolts followed, then 5, each disintegrating against the shield with a sound like glass bells struck underwater. The soldiers fell back, some dropping their weapons to shield their eyes. The sergeant's horse screamed and reared. In the sudden, ringing silence, Leo saw his faith counter plummet to 47, then 12, a dying ember. "Move!" He grabbed Salas by the collar and hauled him toward the sewer grate he'd spotted earlier, a rusted iron mouth half hidden beneath a collapsed market stall. The shield began to flicker, its edges curling like burning paper. Another volley, this one erratic, scattered across the barrier's failing arc. 1 bolt punched through a weak seam and buried itself in the wooden crate beside Leo's ear, vibrating with lethal intent. Salas stumbled, but Leo shoved him down into the darkness. The grate clanged shut above them as the shield finally died, plunging them into a throat of ancient stone and foul water. Above, the soldiers' shouts grew muffled, then distant, replaced by the steady drip of moisture and the skittering of rats. Leo slumped against the slimy wall, the phone's glow casting his face in sickly blue. The faith counter read 4. What was that? Salas wheezed, pressing a hand to his side. Some sorcery of the Mad Emperor. Something like that. Leo's voice was hollow. He stared at the screen, watching the divine shield icon fade back into the menu's depths, its cost now a yawning chasm he couldn't cross. 4 faith points. He couldn't summon a sunny day, let alone the divine punishment he'd been banking on to survive the banquet. The timer in the corner of his vision still ticked, 5 days, 14 hours until the Overthrow event. But the numbers felt like a lie, a countdown to a death he'd earned with every careless tap. The sewers of Veridan were a labyrinth of ancient engineering and recent collapse. They crawled through tunnels that stank of rot and limestone, past walls studded with the nests of pale, blind fish. Leo's merchant cloak grew heavy with filth, and Salas's breathing grew more labored with each twist of the passage. When they finally emerged through a drainage culvert into the grey dawn light of the river quarter, the city was a tableau of his sins. Ash drifted from the smoldering husk of a granary he'd accidentally ignited during the riot. Women with hollow eyes sifted through collapsed market stalls, searching for moldy grain. A plague cart rattled past, its driver wrapped in linen masks, carrying the still forms of those who'd succumbed to the mild plague Leo had unleashed as casually as swiping a screen. The RealmCraft app pulsed softly in his palm, its pastoral music jarring against the moans of the dying. Salus leaned against a broken fountain, its basin dry and cracked from the drought. "You healed me," he said, voice barely a whisper. "You have the power of a god, but the city, it's dying because of you." "Why?" Leo looked at the phone. On the main village screen, his pixelated peasants were now praying at a tiny shrine he built during a distracted meeting. Their speech bubbles floated up, "Praise the fickle god. Send us mercy." A counter next to the shrine read, "Faith generated, +3 per hour." Pathetic. He needed thousands to activate divine punishment. Thousands to undo the banquet trap. "I have to fix it," Leo said, more to himself than to Salus. "But I can't do it with taps anymore. The app, it feeds on devotion. Real devotion. The kind you can't fake with a festival." He straightened, peeling off the ruined cloak. Beneath it he wore the simple tunic of a common laborer, another stolen garment from his earlier disguise. With the cosmetic filter drained and his faith nearly empty, he had no more masks. He was just Emperor Valerius, the mad tyrant, walking into a city that wanted him dead. For the next 6 hours, Leo became something the Empire had never seen. He started at the collapsed tenement on Weaver's Row, where 3 families were trapped beneath beams. His hands, soft from endless office work in another life, bled as he hauled rubble alongside soot-stained workers. He didn't use the phone, he didn't dare spend the remaining faith. Instead he dug, his back screaming, his breath ragged, until a child was pulled free. The crowd murmured, some spitting at his feet, others simply staring in confusion. But one old woman, her face seemed like cracked earth, touched his sleeve and whispered, "The Emperor, he labors like a mortal." A tiny chime from his pocket. He glanced at the screen while wiping sweat from his eyes, faith +15. He moved next to the plague ward outside the Temple of Seraphel, where priests in grey robes were overwhelmed. He had no medical skill beyond basic first aid from a long-ago disaster drill, but he knelt in the mud and pressed cool cloths to fevered brows. He held the hand of a dying dock worker who cursed him with his last breath, then died anyway. Leo stayed, and in the silence that followed, 2 young acolytes exchanged glances. One said, "He does not heal by magic. He just sits with them." Faith +22. By midday, a crowd began to follow him. Not a mob, something stranger, something tentative. They watched the mad emperor carry a bucket of water to a parched public garden, his shoulders trembling with effort. They saw him pause before a shrine to the old gods, a forgotten relic of the city's founding, and lay down the wilted wildflowers he'd plucked from a crack in the pavement. He spoke no grand speeches, made no decrees. He just kept moving, kept working, as if trying to wash away a stain only he could see. In the shadow of a toppled statue of Valerius Leo stopped. The statue's head lay in the gutter, its stone eyes staring at the sky. He looked at it, then at the silent crowd, merchants with closed stalls, mothers with sunken cheeks, veterans with missing limbs. His voice, when it came, was raw and unpracticed. "I've been a fool," he said. The words felt inadequate, a pebble against an avalanche. "I thought power was about tapping something and watching it happen. But I didn't see you. I didn't see any of you." He gestured at the ruined square. "This isn't divine. This is just a man who didn't understand what he was holding." The crowd didn't cheer. But a few lowered their heads, and that felt like something. Faith +40. Miles away, in the obsidian tower of the Spymaster, a different kind of watching unfolded. The Spymaster, a gaunt man named Varendareth, whose eyes were twin chips of winter ice, sat before a bowl of black liquid that reflected no light. The scrying crystal pulsed as it. The morning light filtered through the shattered stained glass window like fractured promises. Leo, or rather the body he now inhabited, sat slumped against the cold stone wall of a derelict chapel on the outskirts of the capital. His hands, blistered from a day of hauling rubble and comforting the dying, cradled the impossible smartphone. The screen glowed with the familiar, deceptively cheerful interface of RealmCraft. In the top corner, a tiny hourglass icon pulsed, its sand nearly gone. The Overthrow countdown had been slashed to less than 2 days. The faith counter beneath it read a pitiful 340 points. Divine punishment required 5,000. He wiped grime from his forehead, the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies clinging to his tattered imperial robes. The city outside the chapel walls groaned with the aftershocks of his earlier blunders, drought-cracked earth, lingering plague miasma, the sour note of riot-broken glass. He had spent the previous day performing what the game called sacred deeds, an unassuming quest log he'd ignored for weeks. Now, those tiny acts of genuine labor had become his lifeline. Each person he lifted from the rubble, each plague victim whose brow he wiped, nudged the faith total upward by a handful of points. And now, a new notification shimmered at the edge of the screen. Leo tapped it. A pixelated hammer struck an anvil in a burst of golden sparkles. A pop-up window unfurled, decorated with filigreed borders. Crafting expansion unlocked, sanctify relic. The faithful must have symbols. Forge holy artifacts from base materials and consecrated intent to generate passive faith streams. Cost, 50 gold, 20 devotion per relic. Devotion, he had learned, was the game's term for the ethereal residue of his sincere actions, another resource he'd been earning without realizing it. His gold reserves, accumulated from forgotten early game taxes, still held at 4,000. It was a fortune he'd never spent on anything useful until now. His thumb hovered over the recipe list. Blessed bread, a simple loaf, broken for the hungry. Generates 1 faith per hour for each recipient blessed. Next to it, a small clay talisman icon, holy amulet, a token of protection. Generates 3 faith per hour for each bearer who truly believes. The interface was so disgustingly cute, a village crafter's dream. Leo almost laughed. He was a tyrant emperor, covered in soot, whose empire was about to murder him, and his only hope was baking bread. He tapped the blessed bread recipe. The phone vibrated gently. In his lap, motes of golden light began to coalesce. The air grew warm and smelled of fresh yeast and honey. A loaf of bread materialized, not the pixel loaf on the screen, but a real, physical artifact. It was rustic, round, its crust scored with a faint cross that pulsed with a soft inner light. Leo stared at it, his breath catching. The sheer impossibility of it, even after everything he'd witnessed, still rattled his exhausted mind. From the chapel's shadowed entrance, a small sound broke his trance. A child, no older than 6, with hollow cheeks and matted hair, had wandered in. She clutched a rag doll, her eyes fixed on the glowing bread. Behind her, a woman with the same gaunt features, her mother, perhaps, hesitated at the threshold, fear warring with desperate hope. Leo rose, his joints aching. He didn't need to be a real emperor to understand this. He tore the loaf in half. The crust crackled, releasing a puff of warm steam that smelled faintly of cardamom. He knelt before the child and placed half in her tiny hands. The moment her fingers touched the bread, the light from the cross on its surface surged, tracing along her skin like liquid sunrise. She gasped, and color flooded back into her cheeks. The hollows beneath her eyes didn't vanish, but they faded, as if life had been poured back in. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing. Leo pressed the other half into her palms. The same gentle glow, the same rapid, tearful transformation. In the corner of his vision, the RealmCraft interface flickered. The faith counter ticked up by 5 points immediately, and a small icon of a loaf with an hourglass appeared, a passive faith stream, a tiny 1 per hour bonus now linked to these 2 lives. Thank you, your majesty, the woman whispered, her voice cracked. Leo flinched at the honorific. He was just Leo. But Emperor Valerius had to be the one to stand here. He nodded, throat tight. Go. Tell others who are hungry to come. They fled, not from fear, but with a strange, buoyant hope. For the first time in days, Leo felt something other than terror. A quiet, fierce determination settled in his chest. He turned back to the altar, a slab of cracked marble, and began tapping more recipes. He poured out gold, poured out devotion. Loaves multiplied in his hands, each bearing that faint, luminous cross. Then, from the mud-caked corners of the chapel, he scraped together clay, wetting it with spilled holy water from a fallen font. The app guided his movements, a ghostly overlay showing him where to press his thumbs, how to shape the amulets into simple sunbursts. Each one that left his hands tingled with a residual warmth, a low-grade holy buzz. Word spread like wildfire through the broken streets. By midday, a procession of the desperate had formed outside the chapel. Not a riotous mob, they came too beaten for that, but a quiet river of limping, coughing, hollow-eyed humanity. Leo stood at the door, distributing warm bread and clay talismans with the unthinking rhythm of a factory line, his fingers cramping. Each recipient touched the bread, felt that surge of light, and walked away changed. The amulets, when clasped around necks or wrists, flared briefly as if recognizing a heartbeat, then settled into a steady, comforting warmth that eased chronic pain or soothed fevered dreams. A man with a twisted leg stumbled forward, leaning on a plank. Leo pressed an amulet into his palm and tore off a corner of bread. The man chewed, and his leg gave a sickening pop. He cried out, then staggered upright. The limb was straight, the swelling gone. He dropped the plank and stood unassisted for the first time in years. The crowd murmured, a buzz of awed, fearful excitement. Leo's faith counter was climbing faster now. A dozen passive streams threaded into his total like invisible tributaries, each relic placed in the hands of a genuine believer paying out its hourly tithe. The system, however, had other ideas. As he was shaping the 20th amulet, the screen flickered. A translucent warning panel overlaid the cheerful crafting menu, its font stark and red. Notice, artificial faith generation may be rejected by the cosmic balance. Forced consecration of mundane matter creates metaphysical debt. Continued operation risks unpredictable glitches. He read it twice. Metaphysical debt. Glitches. The game was telling him this was a cheat, an exploit. That the universe itself kept a ledger, and he was running up a tab. The old Leo, the salaryman who triple-checked expense reports, might have hesitated. This Leo, who had felt crossbow bolts incinerate inches from his face and had less than 48 hours until the traitors carved him up, only clenched his jaw. He swiped the warning aside, the motion dismissive, brutal. There was no other way. The divine punishment had to be fueled. He would deal with the backlash later, if he survived to see it. He crafted more. The bread came quicker now, the amulets almost perfect in their rough beauty. The app's resources dipped, gold dwindled to 2,000, devotion scraped from the raw emotional effort, but the faith counter soared past 800, then 1,200. The passive streams from the distributed relics accelerated the gain, compounding with every new true believer who clutched a talisman and felt its warmth. As dusk began to smear the sky with violet, a peculiar change rippled through the crowd. The miracles weren't confined to the recipients anymore. A woman who had received a loaf hours earlier touched a dying rosebush in a courtyard 3 streets away, and the bush exploded into a riot of crimson blooms, petals glowing faintly in the twilight. A boy wearing an amulet tripped and fell into a well, but the water itself seemed to lift him gently back to the rim, soaking but unharmed. A blind beggar who had merely brushed against a departing crowd member suddenly screamed and covered his eyes, then lowered his hands, sobbing, seeing the colors of the sunset for the first time in a decade. These spontaneous miracles cascaded through the warren of alleys surrounding the chapel, a gentle but undeniable tide of divine overflow. The air itself seemed charged, humming with static before a storm. The people wept, laughed, embraced strangers. A ragged choir broke out, some old hymn Leo didn't know, the words mangled but the melody filled with ragged joy. Leo, standing in the last embers of twilight bled into the horizon as Leo stood at the arched window of his private chamber, the city of Viridia sprawling beneath him like a tapestry woven from shadow and dying torchlight. The palace itself, a gilded cage of marble and treachery, hummed with the quiet tension of a drawn blade. Leo's reflection in the glass was a stranger's face, haggard, dark-circled, the face of an emperor who had spent 7 days fumbling with fate. In his hand, the smartphone pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow, its screen cluttered with village icons and a faith counter that now read 847. He had spent hours distributing sanctified bread and holy amulets to the slums, and the city had answered with whispered prayers that fed the counter like a slow, steady heartbeat. But the warning from the cosmic balance still clawed at his memory, divine backlash imminent. The relics had triggered something unstable, a crack in the veil between his cozy game and this brutal reality. Tonight, he would widen that crack intentionally. Leo's thumb hovered over the weather engine icon, a tiny, smiling cloud with rosy cheeks. With a tap, the screen blossomed into a radial menu of meteorological options, gentle breeze, sunny day, summer shower, and at the very edge, storm's fury. It was absurdly cute, the lightning bolts drawn as tiny yellow zigzags. But Leo had learned that every adorable pixel carried the weight of cataclysm. He selected Storm's Fury and dragged his finger across the sky dome displayed in the game, painting thick, black thunderheads over his virtual village. A prompt appeared, deploy atmospheric anomaly. Cost, 5 faith per activation bolt. Duration, 8 hours. Leo confirmed with a tap that felt like signing a death warrant. Outside the window, the night transformed. The stars didn't just dim, they were devoured. Clouds spiraled inward from the 4 corners of the empire, an unnatural convergence that made the air itself grow heavy and metallic. The first thunderclap wasn't a sound, it was a pressure wave that rattled the very stones of the palace, sending a cascade of dust from the ancient rafters. Candles in Leo's chamber guttered and died, but the phone's screen remained impossibly bright, casting his face in a spectral pallor. He watched the faith counter tick down, 842. 837, 832. With each jagged spear of lightning that tore the sky. The bolts were not random, Leo aimed them with the delicate precision of a painter, targeting the noble quarters first. A searing white thread lanced down into the courtyard of House Malvern, a family known for their whispers against the throne. The boom followed a heartbeat later, deep enough to trigger a chorus of distant screams. Next, he sent a bolt crashing into the barracks roof, not to harm, but to create a dazzling, terrifying display. The blue-white flash illuminated every window, every shadow, every face tilted upward in dread. In the game, his pixel villagers huddled in their pixel cottages. In Viridia, the real citizens did the same, but the conspirators wouldn't be sleeping. Leo imagined the High Chancellor, that silver-tongued serpent, jolting upright in his silk sheets, the fine hairs on his arms standing rigid. The spymaster, a woman whose eyes missed nothing, would be pulling back a curtain to stare at the boiling sky, her calculations unraveling thread by thread. The royal treasurer, a man whose loyalty was measured in coin, would be clutching his ledgers as if they were shields against divine wrath. This storm was a prelude, a statement painted in lightning: your emperor is not mad, he is monstrous. Faith dropped to 812. Leo's jaw tightened. He had planned for this cost, but each expenditure felt like bleeding out time. He needed enough faith for the final act, the divine punishment that the app had dangled before him like a poisoned fruit. But first, he had to win the hearts and minds of those who would be holding the knives tomorrow night. The guards. He backed out of the weather engine and navigated to the event tab. There, nestled between village potluck and sheep parade, was an option he had unlocked only after hitting a hidden faith threshold: prophetic dream. The icon showed a closed-eye weeping golden light. Description: send a shared vision to a targeted demographic within your realm. Cost: 20 faith per recipient. Leo did the math quickly. The palace guard complement was roughly 200 men stationed throughout the complex. Targeting them all would cost 4,000 faith, impossible. But he didn't need all of them. He needed the 50 who would be on duty at the banquet hall's perimeter. The loyal ones might believe, the traitors would panic. He scrolled through the game's interface until he found the guard rotation schedule, a delightfully mundane feature that tracked the pixel knights patrolling his virtual keep. He cross-referenced it with his memory of the real palace layout, marking each guard post with a tap. Select targets. The app asked. 50 icons representing real, breathing men glowed softly. Leo hesitated. He had never used this power before. The warning from the cosmic balance hadn't mentioned dreams, but the static on his screen earlier had been a maddening splatter of color and noise, as if reality itself was tearing at the seams. What if the prophecy caused another backlash? What if the guards saw not his godhood, but his fraud? A crack of thunder, timed perfectly with his uncertainty, shattered the silence. He had already unleashed the storm. He was already past the point of retreat. Leo pressed confirm. The faith counter plunged from 812 to 212 in an instant. The phone vibrated violently, and for a terrifying second, the screen went black. Then a single line of text scrolled across it, weaving dreamscape: recipients in 3, 2, 1. In the guard barracks, the effect was immediate and devastating. Sergeant Aldrich had been standing at the window, watching the unnatural storm with the dull, practiced calm of a man who had survived 2 sieges and a famine. He was not a superstitious man, he believed in steel and discipline. But when the first wave of exhaustion hit him, his knees buckled. He slid down the wall, eyes fluttering, and suddenly he was no longer in the barracks. He stood in a vast emptiness, a void without floor or ceiling, and before him rose a figure of impossible light. It had the shape of Emperor Valerius, but the face was serene, and from its shoulders unfurled wings of pure, blinding radiance. The figure raised a hand, and Aldrich felt a command imprint itself on his soul: serve the one true emperor, or be unmade. He woke screaming. Around him, other guards were thrashing on their cots, some weeping, some clutching their heads. Corporal Vex, a man who had personally taken bribes from the spymaster, staggered to his feet and bolted for the door, his eyes wild. I saw him, he shrieked. I saw the emperor in a throne of stars and swords. He knew my name. He knew what I had. He didn't finish. He simply fled into the storm, his armor clanking a panicked rhythm until the rain swallowed him. Nearly a third of the guards deserted that night. Some ran because they were guilty, others because the vision had unhinged something fundamental in their understanding of the world. The barracks erupted into chaos, with officers shouting orders that no one obeyed, while the sky outside continued to scream with lightning. The High Chancellor, when informed, sat in his darkened study and poured himself a goblet of vinegar-dry wine with a hand that trembled only slightly. He was not a fool. He understood that the Emperor was wielding something he could not counter with poison or a sharpened blade. But a cornered man is the most dangerous. He sent word to his fellow conspirators, the plan for the banquet must stand, but we must accelerate. Tomorrow, at the feast, we strike before he can conjure another miracle. Leo, oblivious to the exact machinations but sure of the impact, watched the storm rage until his eyes burned. The phone screen had stabilized, the static ceasing, but a new message glowed in the corner: cosmic balance destabilized. Unforeseen events may manifest. He had no idea what that meant. A plague of frogs? A rift in the sky? He was too exhausted to care. He sank into his throne-like chair, the velvet cold against his spine, and allowed himself a single, shuddering breath. One more night. One more sunrise. When dawn finally bled through the retreating clouds, it was a watery, hesitant light, as if the sun itself was afraid of what this day would bring. Leo hadn't slept. His eyes were gritty, his limbs leaden, but the phone in his hand hummed with a new, insistent energy. The faith counter had trickled upward during the night, fed by the prayers of terrified citizens who mistook his storm for divine anger, and now sat at 301. The game's interface had shifted, simplifying into a single, pulsing window. The words The grand hall blazed with 1,000 candles, their flames trembling as if even the fire sensed the coming atrocity. Long tables draped in crimson silk bent under platters of roasted swan and glazed pheasant, the cloying sweetness of honeyed wine thick enough to choke. Leo, Emperor Valerius, stepped through the towering bronze doors, and the weight of his own heartbeat was the only companion he trusted. The 23 conspirators rose as one. Their smiles were sugared arsenic, their bows shallow mockeries of respect. The High Chancellor, Lord Varon, spread his arms like a father welcoming a prodigal son, though his eyes were winter-cold. Beside him, the spymaster's fingers drummed a silent rhythm on the table, while the royal treasurer's goblet trembled faintly, not from fear, Leo noted, but anticipation. Leo's hand lay hidden in the folds of his imperial sleeve, fingers curled around the divine smartphone. Its screen was dark, but he felt its faint warmth, a pulse that kept time with his own. The RealmCraft app waited, a single button dominating the display. Divine punishment, confirm. Cost, 300 faith. Current faith, 1. 1 point. A single, pitiful ember against an ocean of treachery. But the phone had taught him that symbols mattered more than numbers. He walked to the head of the table, each step a deliberate thud on marble, and lowered himself onto the high-backed throne. The velvet cushion swallowed him like a waiting grave. Your Radiance honors us, the High Chancellor said, lifting his goblet. The other 22 followed, a chorus of silver and crystal. On this, the eve of reconciliation, let us drink to the Empire's enduring glory. A servant poured wine into Leo's cup, a deep purple liquid that smelled of blackberries and something beneath, something metallic. He had learned to read the air. The Chancellor's toast was not merely ceremony, it was the signal. The paralytic draught they had slipped into his midday meal now coiled in his veins, a slow serpent waiting to strike. By the second toast, they expected his limbs to stiffen like stone, his tongue to swell, his screams to die in a frozen throat. Leo raised the cup to his lips. He let the rim touch them, but did not drink. The cold numbness was already spreading from his fingertips, a creeping stiffness that no amount of will could banish. His legs felt distant, his jaw a hinge of rust. This was the moment they had schemed for, an emperor rendered a statue, aware but helpless, while 23 blades carved history into his flesh. Under the table, his thumb moved across the phone screen. He had discovered a new submenu during his night of terror storms and prophetic dreams, a tab tucked beneath, local effects, that required no faith at all because it altered nothing in the world, only himself. The label had glowed in soft script, emotional projection, invert surface effect. He activated it now. A tremor began in his shoulders, spreading outward until his hands shook like aspen leaves. His eyes widened, the pupils blooming with manufactured dread. Sweat beaded on his brow and rolled down his temples, and a pathetic whimper slipped past his lips, a sound so small, so broken, that several conspirators exchanged glances of barely concealed delight. Is something amiss, Your Radiance? The spymaster's voice was silk wrapped around a blade. He leaned forward, watching Leo's quaking fingers with the detached curiosity of an entomologist observing a pinned moth. Leo tried to speak, but only a garbled whisper emerged. The emotional projection painted his face with pure, animal terror. His left hand, the one still visible above the table, clawed weakly at the tablecloth as though seeking purchase in a world that had suddenly tilted. The poison was real, the numbness had climbed to his elbows, but the fear he displayed was a masterpiece, a canvas of calculated horror. He feels it now, the royal treasurer muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. The Blightwater extract. An hour's delay, then the limbs calcify. The High Chancellor set down his goblet. The clink echoed like a death knell. He walked around the long table, each step slow and savoring, until he stood directly before the trembling emperor. The hall had fallen silent but for the crackle of candles and Leo's ragged breathing. "Do you know why this must be, Valerius?" The Chancellor's tone was no longer velvet. It was salt in a wound. "You were not always mad. There was a time, brief, flickering, when we thought you might be merely incompetent. But the past week, the drought that ended without explanation, the plague that felled half the palace, the festival that turned the city into a riotous charnel house, all on your whims. You woke with laughter on the morning the grain stores burned. You wept with joy when the fever crested. We have watched you, and we have concluded that your existence is a malignancy the Empire can no longer afford." He gestured to the other conspirators, and they rose from their seats, pushing back chairs with deliberate scrape. 23 knives will make it quick. In the annals, they will write that you fell to an unknown assassin, and we will mourn with the proper grief. The realm will heal. The spymaster drew a thin stiletto from his belt, its edge catching the candlelight. The guards have been given a different story tonight. They will not interfere. Your prophetic dreams frighten some, but fear can be turned with enough gold. Leo's head lolled forward, chin touching his chest. The emotional projection deepened, his lips quivered, his breath came in shallow gasps. He made a sound like a child lost in darkness. It was a performance so utterly convincing that even the Chancellor, who had known him since boyhood, saw only a broken man. The poison pressed hard, skeletal fingers closing on his spine, but deep inside, behind the shield of the Apps inversion, Leo's mind was a cold blade of clarity. He catalogued faces, counted weapons, noted exits. 23. All here. All confessing. You have nothing to say, the Chancellor asked, a theatrical tilt to his head. No final curse. No divine wrath to call down. We heard whispers of your little lightbox. A toy for a dying fool. The phone's warmth intensified against Leo's palm. He could feel the screen pressing into his thigh, the button pulsing with that impossible requirement, 300 faith. Yet something else was happening beneath the interface, a sequence of code or command he hadn't initiated. The faith counter flickered. 1. Then 2, then 3, numbers climbing in a silent cascade, too fast to read. The poison in his blood ebbed suddenly, pushed back by a surge of unfamiliar heat emanating from the device itself. He lifted his head. The trembling stopped. The wild-eyed terror melted from his features like frost before a furnace. Leo straightened on the throne, and the conspirators, so confident moments before, stumbled backward as if slapped. The emotional projection inverted once more, not to fear, but to something ancient and absolute. His eyes, no longer hazy, reflected the candlelight as twin suns. A toy, Leo repeated, his voice calm and resonant. Yes. Let me show you my toy. He pushed back his sleeve. The divine smartphone emerged, its screen blazing with an inner radiance that cast stark, leaping shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The device was no longer a mere rectangle of metal and glass, it hummed with a sound that vibrated in the teeth, in the marrow. The divine punishment, confirm, button glowed like a captured star, and beside it, the faith counter had stopped its frantic climb at a number too large to comprehend. The High Chancellor took an instinctive step back. What sorcery? Leo rose from the throne. The paralysis was gone, burned away by the phone's sudden surge. He held the device aloft, thumb hovering over the brilliant button. The hall's temperature plummeted. Candles sputtered, some dying outright, as a pressure built behind the air, a soundless thunder waiting to speak. You wanted divine wrath, Leo said, and his voice was no longer entirely his own. It resonated with harmonics that made crystal goblets tremble and crack. You shall have it. His thumb descended, a hair's breadth from the screen. The app pulsed once, twice, a heartbeat of light that threw the 23 traitors into stark relief, their faces masks of dawning horror, the spymaster's stiletto clattering to the floor, the royal treasurer clutching his chest. In that exquisite, suspended instant, Leo's expression was not of rage, but of serene, terrible certainty. The button waited. The grand banquet hall of the imperial palace had never known such silence. It was the silence of held breath, of hearts suspended between beats, of 23 souls staring into the abyss of their own undoing. Leo's thumb, once trembling with the residue of paralytic poison, now descended with the certainty of a falling star. He pressed confirm. The smartphone in his palm did not simply vibrate or chime. It came apart. Tiny particles of golden light peeled away from the device like autumn leaves caught in an updraft, each one a fragment of code so intricate, so impossibly complex, that merely looking at them made the eyes water. They spiraled outward in a vortex of radiance, coiling around Leo's forearm, his wrist, his fingers. The sensation was neither hot nor cold, it was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to the pretensions of mortal power. The gauntlet of judgment took shape, interlocking plates of solidified light, etched with symbols that predated the empire's oldest dynasties. The phone itself was gone now, entirely dissolved, its essence woven into the armor of a god. Lord Varen's wine glass slipped from his fingers. It struck the marble floor with a crystalline chime that seemed obscenely loud in the stillness. The High Chancellor's face, moments ago twisted with vindictive triumph, now slackened into something far more primal. He had spent decades mastering the art of the unreadable expression, but what he witnessed now stripped away every layer of political cunning, leaving only the raw, naked terror of a man who understood, in that moment, that he had made a very grave miscalculation. What sorcery is this? The spymaster's voice cracked. The man who knew every secret in the empire, who had ears in every shadow and eyes in every wall, was reduced to stammering disbelief. Guards! Guards, seize him! No guards came. The doors to the hall remained shut, and those few sentries who had been stationed inside found their feet rooted to the floor, their hands incapable of gripping sword hilts. An invisible pressure filled the chamber, thickening the air until every breath felt like drawing honey through a straw. The royal treasurer backed away until his shoulders struck a pillar. His ledger, that meticulous record of every coin stolen from the imperial treasury to fund the coup, slipped from his grasp and scattered its pages across the floor like wounded birds. This wasn't in the plan, he whispered. This can't be. And then the roof peeled back. There was no sound of tearing stone, no cascade of rubble. The ceiling of the banquet hall simply parted. Like tissue paper drawn aside by an enormous, careful hand. The frescoes of imperial conquests, the gilded moldings, the great iron chandeliers, they all folded away into nothingness, revealing a sky that should not have existed. It was the sky of another world. No, it was the sky of judgment. Above them hung a tribunal of impossible scale. Figures composed of cloud and starlight sat in a great arc, their forms too vast to comprehend, their features shifting between recognizable shapes and pure celestial geometry. Behind them wheeled galaxies that moved like clockwork, and between them ran threads of golden light that pulsed with the rhythm of a billion heartbeats. This was not heaven. This was something older than heaven, something that had existed before the first prayer was ever uttered, before the first altar was ever raised. The 23 conspirators found they could not move. Not because chains had bound them, not yet, but because their bodies had simply forgotten how. Muscles that had schemed and plotted and poisoned now refused even the simplest command. They stood as statues, their fine silks and polished armor suddenly absurd, the costumes of children playing at power. Then the spectral echoes began. The air in front of Lord Varen shimmered, and a scene unfolded like mist coalescing into water. It showed the Chancellor in his private study, 3 nights past, dictating the assassination order to his most trusted scribe. The quill scratched across parchment as Varen's voice, his actual voice, drawn from memory itself, spoke of how the Emperor's madness had brought the empire to ruin, how the only mercy left was a quick death and a clean succession. But the echo did not stop at his justifications. It peeled back the layers, revealing the ambition beneath, the decades of resentment, the secret pleasure he took in the thought of finally sitting upon the throne himself. Enough. Varen's real voice, here and now, tore from his throat. This is trickery. This is. Another echo materialized beside the spymaster. It showed him receiving the Chancellor's order, then meticulously plotting the means of delivery. The paralytic poison, chosen for its deniability. The bribes to the kitchen staff. The careful arrangement of the banquet seating to ensure the Emperor would be surrounded on all sides when the signal came. The spy master's echo voice spoke of numbers with cold precision, of acceptable losses, of the exact angle at which a dagger should enter between the ribs to ensure a silent kill. More echoes blossomed around the hall. The royal treasurers, showing how he had siphoned funds to bribe the palace guard. The Minister of Public Works, whose echo revealed the secret tunnels he had constructed beneath the city to move weapons and loyalists into position. The captain of the Imperial Watch, caught in the act of swearing false oaths to the very emperor he planned to murder. One by one, the sins of 23 souls were given form and voice, played out in silent pantomime and whispered accusation. Leo watched it all from the center of the storm. The gauntlet on his arm pulsed with each revelation, and words appeared before his eyes, not on a screen now, but floating in the air itself, golden letters that only he could read. They scrolled past his vision with the calm inevitability of a legal judgment being pronounced. Chancellor Varin, treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, corruption of imperial institutions. Spymaster Kale, treason, orchestration of assassination, subversion of intelligence networks. Treasurer Malthus, treason, embezzlement of imperial funds, financing of insurrection. Captain Aldrich. Minister Fenwick. Councillor Dorian. The list went on, 23 names, 23 verdicts. And at the bottom of each entry, a single judgment, guilty. Leo felt the words rise in his throat before he consciously decided to speak them. They were not his words, not exactly, but they passed through him with the ease of a river flowing through a channel carved long ago. When he opened his mouth, the voice that emerged was layered with harmonies that shook the very foundations of the palace. By the scales of RealmCraft, your fates are sealed. The tribunal above them seemed to lean forward. The galaxies stopped their rotation. The threads of golden light pulled taut. And then the columns descended. They were not fire. Not lightning. Not any element known to mortal science or mortal magic. They were light made solid, eternity compressed into pillars of searing radiance that punched through the air like the judgments of a god who had grown tired of waiting. 23 columns, one for each traitor, and each one landed with a sound that was less a noise and more a rearrangement of reality itself. The conspirators' weapons, hidden daggers, poisoned needles, the sword the captain had been too frozen to draw, simply ceased to exist. One moment they were steel and wood and leather. The next, they were motes of dust caught in the light, then nothing at all. The columns did not discriminate, they annihilated any instrument of violence within their radius with the same casual efficiency. But the conspirators themselves were not destroyed. Chains materialized around their bodies, chains made not of metal but of time itself, loops of frozen moments linked together in shimmering bands. The spymaster screamed as a chain wrapped around his chest, and the scream stretched out into an eternity that lasted only a heartbeat. The treasurer was bound at the wrists and ankles, his struggles stilled by the weight of every second he had stolen from the empire. One by one, the traitors were shackled by their own history, their own choices made manifest and turned against them. The light was blinding, yet somehow Leo could see everything. He saw the chancellor fall to his knees. He saw the spymaster's face contort with disbelief giving way to despair. He saw tears streaming down the treasurer's cheeks, whether from fear or regret he could not tell and did not care to know. The banquet table, that monument of false celebration, laden with poisoned wine and traitorous toasts, shattered beneath the onslaught of divine energy. Plates and goblets scattered across the marble FL. The silence that followed the celestial tribunal was not the silence of peace, but of a world holding its breath. The vast banquet hall, once a crucible of treachery, now lay broken open to the cold night sky. The roof, peeled back like the rind of some divine fruit, revealed a scatter of stars that seemed to lean closer, curious. Embers from extinguished braziers drifted lazily through the air, mingling with the lingering motes of golden light that still clung to the shattered stone. In the center of the hall, 22 figures were frozen mid-gesture, encased in chains of solidified time, crystalline links that hummed with an otherworldly resonance, trapping assassins, poisoners, and embezzlers alike in a tableau of eternal arrest. Leo stood on the raised dais, his chest heaving. The weight of what had just occurred pressed down on him like a physical force, yet his limbs felt light, buoyed by the residual grace of the tribunal. A faint, lambent glow still traced the lines of his imperial tunic, a dying echo of the judgment that had poured through him. In his hand, the smartphone had rematerialized from the gauntlet of light, its screen dark for a moment before flickering back to the familiar, cheerful interface of RealmCraft. A notification pulsed softly, event complete. Downloading expansion. 0.1%. The progress bar sat motionless, a sliver of silver stuck against a deep green background. The only movement in the hall came from a figure just beyond the ring of bound conspirators. High Chancellor Lord Varon had not been fully taken. The chains had coiled around his legs and one arm, but a desperate, wrenching twist of his body had snapped several links, leaving his sword arm free and his torso unbound. His ceremonial robes were charred, the velvet blackened, and a raw, weeping wound traced his jawline where the divine light had seared him. Yet he remained on his feet, swaying, his eyes two coals of undying malice. "Madman," Varon rasped, his voice carrying across the deathly quiet like a curse. "Loved by none. You think the Empire will kneel now? They will see only a tyrant who wields terror as a crown." His laugh was a dry, rattling thing. He took a lurching step forward, but the remaining chains around his leg tightened, and he stumbled to one knee. Still, he did not fall. His glare remained fixed on Leo, a promise of future poison. Then, from the arched doorways that lined the hall, came the hesitant shuffle of feet. The loyalists, the guards who had not been turned, the servants who had hidden in pantries, the minor clerks who had been too insignificant for the conspiracy, emerged from the shadows. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale as moonstone. One by one, they fell to their knees. There was no command, no shouted order. It was the instinct of souls who had witnessed the divine and knew fear and awe in equal measure. The rustle of their robes and the clank of scabbard striking stone filled the void left by the tribunal's departure. Among them, a figure pushed forward, Captain Cashin, commander of the palace watch, a man Leo recognized from fleeting memories of official audiences. Cashin was broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper beard unkempt, his armor smudged with ash. He had not been part of the coup, too unremarkable for the conspirators to recruit, or perhaps too stubbornly loyal. Now, he knelt with a heavy thud, his gauntlet fist pressed to his heart. "Emperor Valerius," Cashin breathed, his voice rough. "What are your orders?" The question cut through the fog in Leo's mind. He was not a spectator anymore. He was the emperor. The gauntlet was gone, but the smartphone pulsed in his grip like a second heartbeat. He forced his voice to steady, dredging up every ounce of authority he had learned from corporate presentations and drunken late-night strategy chats from his old life. "Bind them," Leo said. His voice came out stronger than he felt, amplified by the lingering resonance that still vibrated in his throat. "Every conspirator, including the Chancellor. Use iron shackles as well. The chains of the tribunal will hold, but I want no chance of escape." He pointed at Varon. The Chancellor spat, but his strength was waning. Cashin gestured sharply, and a dozen loyal guards surged forward, carefully maneuvering around the time-forged links to clamp heavy iron manacles over Varon's wrists and ankles. Only then did the man's defiance finally buckle, and he sagged into their grip. "Also," Leo continued, scanning the hall, "seal every entrance to the palace. No one leaves until I say so. Then, send heralds into the city. I want the people to gather in the Grand Forum. I will address them at dawn." Cashin hesitated for only a heartbeat, then bowed his head. "It shall be done, Divine Emperor." The title sent a shiver through Leo. Divine Emperor. The words felt like a mask he wasn't sure he could wear. But he nodded, and the loyalists scrambled to obey, their movements efficient and desperate to prove their worth. Left alone for a moment, Leo turned his attention back to the smartphone. The RealmCraft screen had shifted subtly during the chaos. The usual farming village was still there, pixelated and cheerful, but a new set of icons rimmed the bottom of the display. One, shaped like a brass horn, pulsed gently. Beneath it, a small label read, "Public Broadcast." Another icon, a stylized scale, was labeled "Loyalty Chart." He tapped the horn icon first. The screen flickered. A text box appeared, "Speak, and your voice shall carry across the capital. This act will cost 50 faith points." Faith points. Leo glanced at the counter at the top of the screen. During the banquet, the number had been dangerously low, siphoned by his earlier disastrous taps. But now, it was climbing, a slow, steady trickle of tiny golden numbers that popped up from the village tiles. 12. 27. 41. The divine spectacle had been witnessed by more than just the palace. The city had seen the roof peel open, the columns of searing light. They were already believing. He took a deep breath and pressed, "Activate." The smartphone vibrated, and Leo felt a warmth spread from his chest to his throat. The air around him shimmered, and he instinctively knew that his next words would not stay within the hall. They would roll out over the rooftops, into the warren of streets, across the Grand Forum, and into every crumbling tenement and gilded manor. Dawn was still an hour away, but he could not wait. He strode to the edge of the dais, stepping over a fallen golden goblet that still reeked of poisoned wine. He turned his face upward toward the rent in the ceiling, toward the waiting stars, and he spoke. "People of the Empire," Leo began, and his voice, smooth yet resonant with an unearthly timbre, cascaded outward like ripples in a still lake. "This is your emperor. For many days, you have suffered. A drought ended, yes, but it was replaced by plague. Riots erupted during a festival meant to bring joy. You have wondered if I had gone mad, or if the gods had abandoned us. I confess to you now, these trials were not accidents." He paused, feeling the words land like stones. In some distant courtyard, he imagined heads lifting, bleary-eyed merchants stiffening. The silence before dawn would be filling with his voice. "I, too, underwent a trial," he continued, the words shaping themselves from a truth he could only partially reveal. "A higher power, an ancient covenant that predates this empire, was testing the strength of our realm. The chaos you endured was a purification, a sieve to reveal the corruption that festered in the very heart of our court. The assassins who plotted my death were not acting alone, they were agents of greed, of rot, and they have been judged." He gestured broadly, and as if in response, the lingering glow of the hall pulsed. He knew the citizens could not see it directly, but the sky above the palace still shimmered faintly, a silent testament. "I do not ask for forgiveness, for I was a vessel of that judgment, not its master. But I ask for your faith. Your empire is not dying. It is being reborn. Look to the palace this night and know that the corruption has been dragged into the light and broken." The faith point counter on the smartphone began to accelerate. 78. 135. 210, the numbers were no longer a trickle, they were a flood. Leo could almost feel the weight of the belief being poured into the device, a warm, steady pressure against his palm. It was both terrifying and intoxicating. Those who conspired against the throne, 23 lords of the highest rank, now kneel in chains of time itself. The High Chancellor, the Spymaster, the Royal Treasurer, all will face the consequences of their crimes. But to the common people, to the merchants, the farmers, the soldiers and artisans, I offer a new covenant. Serve the empire loyally, and you will see prosperity beyond your imagination. The gods have not forsaken us. The candle flame guttered in the stale air of the study, its light clawing at the shadows that had become Leo's world. For 3 days he had barely moved from this chair, the weight of the imperial seal pressing into the velvet cloth beside a half-eaten tray of cold meat. His fingers, once calloused from office keyboards, now ached from a different kind of tapping. The RealmCraft app glowed with a soft, pastoral hue that belied the carnage it had just unleashed upon the throne room. But now, it wore a new skin. A golden kingdom scan overlay pulsed gently, transforming the map of the Valerian Empire into a lattice of glowing data points. He pinched the screen, zooming past the capital's restored walls and into the web of trade routes and provincial treasuries. Red tendrils, like infected veins, crawled from a dozen cities straight to the heart of the royal court. Each life a node of corruption the old Valerius had not merely ignored, but unknowingly fertilized with his madness. Leo watched a bloated grain silo icon pulse. The eastern granary, which was supposed to feed 20,000 souls, held a cargo of sand and rotten cloth according to the scan. The treasury official responsible for it was a man named Harlock, a name Leo had never heard before, yet now he knew the man's daily schedule, his hidden assets, and the name of the assassin he had once hired to silence a city auditor. A weary sigh escaped him. This wasn't a game. He understood that now. Every tap was a decree written in fire and blood. But he had no choice. The countdown to the banquet was a scar on his memory, but the deeper rot would fester long after the traitors were in chains. He tapped Harlock's icon. A menu flickered: investigate, confront, or truth serum, cost, 75 faith. His faith reserves, once a frantic handful of points, now sat at a healthy 12,430 after the dawn broadcast. The city's terrified awe had become something rich, something he could spend. He selected the serum. In a damp cell 3 levels beneath the palace, the spymaster, whose real name turned out to be Jorvan Kale, screamed. One moment he was glaring defiantly through the bars at Captain Cashin's armored silhouette, the next his mind became a placid lake reflecting only truth. The change was not visible, but Cashin's gasp told Leo, watching through a grainy scry feature on the phone, that the man's eyes had gone unfocused, milky. Kale's confession spilled like water from a cracked dam: names, hidden vaults, the High Chancellor's contingency plan to blame the Eastern barbarians for the Emperor's death. Leo recorded it all, his thumb hovering over the Mend Relations tab as Kale's voice finally cracked into sobs. He turned his attention to the outer provinces. The amend relations option wasn't just a political tool, it was a localized atmospheric adjustment. For a cost of 200 faith per region, he could project a blanket of emotional soothing, a subtle wave that smoothed over the terror his earlier plagues and storms had sown. He tapped the arid province of Thessera, whose people had nearly rioted when the drought ended but the grain rotted. A warmth spread from the phone into his fingertips, and through the scry he saw a dusty market square where a mother, who had been hoarding a crust, suddenly found herself sharing it with a neighbor's child. No magic, just a shift in the heart's weather. The faith counter dropped by 200, then ticked back up by 15 as a single prayer, confused but genuine, registered from that very square. The system was unstable, a feedback loop of divine economics he was only beginning to grasp. A soft chime pulled him from his trance. A golden scroll icon unfurled at the top of the screen, a quest. He'd seen simple tasks before, harvest 10 wheat had once caused a real bumper crop, but this one was grand. Quest, renewal of the heartland. Step 1, clear 2,000 tons of debris from the high ward. Step 2, repair the sunken aqueduct. Step 3, plant the world tree sapling, special reward, everbloom sapling, ... His breath caught. A world tree. He'd seen a grayed out slot for it in the app's Wonders menu, a silhouette of a colossal, radiant oak. The cost to trigger the first step alone was 5,000 faith and a cool million gold from the imperial coffers, money the corrupt treasury barely held together. He summoned the new royal treasurer, a young woman named Leora whom the truth serum interrogations had cleared of any taint. Her appointment had been a gamble, but her eyes were sharp with an honest fear of him that kept her competent. Divert all funds from the cancelled border vanity projects, he ordered, not looking up from his phone. We are rebuilding the capital. Not restoring, rebuilding. She hesitated, then bowed. As the Emperor commands. What followed was a night of silent, apocalyptic labor. Leo sat on a balcony overlooking the ruined high ward, where the celestial spectacle had shattered rooftops. Under the moonlight, he tapped repair on district after district. Each tap sent a shiver through his body as if he were the conduit for a current too great for mortal flesh. The faith counter drained like water through a sieve. 10,000. 7,200. 3,000, the phone grew warm, then hot. On the streets below, rubble did not just lift, it shimmered and dissolved into motes of golden dust before reforming into flawless cobblestones and timber frames. The aqueduct groaned as ancient fractures sealed with seams of glowing lichen. Workers and guards stood frozen, their lanterns flickering in a wind that smelled of ozone and roses. When the cost reached 500 faith, Leo finally held the sapling icon in his trembling hand. It was just a pixelated sprout, 2 green dots and a brown stem, but it pulsed with a light that made his eyes water. He dragged it to the garden map, placing it in the very center of the royal sanctuary, a place that had been a graveyard of withered hedges since the old emperor's paranoia forbade gardeners. He released it. The phone vibrated once, violently, and went black for 3 terrifying seconds. Then the night turned to day. A pillar of soft, verdant light erupted from the garden, expanding outward in a silent, slow-motion wave. Leo rushed to the window, his heart a war drum. The world tree was growing. Not over decades or seasons, but in the space of a breath. A trunk of silvered bark spiraled upward, branches unfurling like the arms of a waking titan. Leaves, gold-veined and iridescent, rustled with a music that was not quite sound but more a pressure in the chest. By the time the first sparrow landed on a lower branch, the tree had eclipsed the palace towers, its canopy a shimmering nebula casting a warm, healthy daylight even in the pre-dawn gloom. Cheers erupted from the city. Leo saw them on the map as a cascade of green dots, hope points, the app labeled them, flooding the pop-up chart. Stabilization surged to 92%. For a moment, he felt it, the love of a people who believed in a miracle. He closed his eyes and let himself believe it too. Then the first glitch hit. A gardener's shed at the edge of the sanctuary suddenly warped, its wooden planks flowing like water before snapping back into a shape subtly wrong, the door now on the roof, the window a weeping eye of liquid glass. A nearby fountain's water turned to solid gold for 2 seconds, trapping a swooping dove in a moment of shimmering death before it dissolved back to water and the bird flew on, terrified. Cashin's voice crackled over a rushed report. A section of the northern wall had become translucent for a full minute, soldiers seeing the stars through the stone, and one guard's sword had melted into a puddle of harmless light before reforming, but the man's hand bore a burn that spelled a single word, null. Leo stared at the app, his throat dry. The faith counter was climbing again, but erratically. It would flash 2,000, then 8, then 15,000 in a single blink. The source was tainted, he realized. The populace's awe was genuine, but it was mixed with the psychic residue of his earlier, terror-driven miracles. The world tree was drinking it all in, and the unstable faith was causing divine backlash. Reality glitches were the fabric of the app's logic frayed. He quickly tapped System Stabilize, an option that cost a staggering 500 faith each time, but the glitches only paused momentarily. 3 days later, the capital was a city of living paradoxes. Children played under the shimmering canopy of the world tree, whose falling leaves granted sweet dreams to those they touched. Yet in the merchant quarter, a street had permanently taken on a lavender hue that left everyone who walked it humming a forgotten folk tune for an hour. Leo had not slept. He sat in a hastily organized council meeting, the new faces of his government arranged around a table of polished obsidian. Minister Leora was reading a report on grain surplus, her voice steady. Captain Cashin stood at attention by. Dawn spilled over the capital like honey poured from a celestial jar. The rebuilt palace rose from the scars of the divine backlash weeks, its marble columns aglow with soft gold light, the crystalline leaves of the world tree shimmering in the central courtyard far below. From the imperial balcony, Leo could see the entire city waking up, market stalls unfurling awnings of crimson and sapphire, bakers pulling fresh loaves from ovens, children chasing each other along the repaved streets. The scent of blooming jasmine from the royal gardens mixed with the distant tang of the sea. He leaned against the carved balustrade, the cool stone pressing against his forearms. The crown, a simple band of silver he had reluctantly started wearing, sat heavy atop his head. It still felt like a costume. His breath left him in a long, slow exhale. 7 days had passed since that fateful banquet where he had tapped divine punishment and watched the heavens obliterate the traitorous council. 7 days of auditing, confessing, healing, and frantically tapping at a phone screen to mend the empire he had almost destroyed by accident. And now, the Overthrow event timer was gone. The loyalty meter on his RealmCraft app sat at a steady 92%. The city sang his name, not as Valerius the Mad, but as Valerius the Restorer. The clumsy god emperor who had somehow stumbled into saving his people. Captain Cashin's armored footsteps approached from behind. Leo didn't turn. "Your Grace," the morning reports, Cashin said, his voice carrying the rough warmth of a man who had gone from fearing his emperor to quietly respecting him. "Minister Edric reports grain stores are fully replenished. Treasurer Leora says the new tax reforms have been accepted by all 7 provinces. There hasn't been a single protest. No riots. No plagues. No frogs falling from the sky." Leo asked, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Cashin gave a low chuckle. "No frogs, sire. The temple priests are calling it the dawn of clarity. They've even composed a hymn about the world tree's leaves singing lullabies to the moons." Leo turned then, catching the captain's eye. "And what do you call it?" "A well-earned rest, Your Grace. For all of us." The captain bowed and retreated, leaving Leo alone with the morning and the silent weight of the smartphone in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen flickered to life, the familiar icon of the RealmCraft app, a stylized pixel castle surrounded by animated wheat fields, hovering above his palm. It was still absurd. A farming sim that controlled reality. He had accepted that now, mostly. But a part of him, the part that had once been an exhausted salaryman named Leo, still felt a spike of anxiety every time a new notification popped up. A soft chime rang out, and a glowing banner unfurled across the top of the screen. Divine Co-op unlocked. * invite trusted allies to co-manage your realm. Share weather effects, share festival buffs, share the burden of godhood. Requires 1,000 faith points *. Leo stared at it. His thumb hovered over the banner. Co-op. The app had never mentioned multiplayer before. The idea sent a cold thread of unease through his gut. Who else was out there with a phone like this? Were there other emperors, other worlds, tapping on their own little pixel kingdoms? He hesitated, his mind racing through the consequences. If he invited Cashin, or Leora, or Edric, would they see the app as he did? Would they gain the power to smite and bless? The potential for disaster was astronomical. He had almost destroyed the empire alone, a co-op partner could finish the job. But before his thumb could press accept or dismiss, the screen spasmed. A jagged crack of static ripped across the display, and the cheerful farming music warped into a discordant, scraping noise like metal tearing. The world tree below him flickered, its luminescence stuttering as if a shadow had passed over the sun. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He tried to close the app, but the phone was unresponsive. A new window forced itself open, consuming the entire screen with a harsh, minimalist interface of black and crimson. Expansion pack, the Null Order's Uprising. Mandatory installation in progress. No, 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 Leo muttered, his fingers tightening around the device. I didn't agree to this. I don't want an expansion. The screen resolved into a vast, pan-continental map that expanded far beyond the borders of his empire. It was unlike the cozy pixel art of RealmCraft. This was rendered in cold, near-photorealistic detail, topographical ridges dusted with digital snow, oceans that churned with unnatural black currents, and borders marked not by dotted lines but by seething walls of smoke. His own kingdom appeared as a small, glowing patch of green and gold in the southern corner, utterly dwarfed by towering kingdoms to the north and east. Names flared across them, each one sounding like a death knell: the kingdom of rusted spires, the drowned covenant, the gaze of unmaking. And at the very center of it all, a pulsating black vortex labeled simply, Null Order Central. Leo's breath caught. The Null Order. He remembered the red alert from days ago, external administrator detected. Intrusion likely. This wasn't an intrusion anymore. It was an invasion. The phone vibrated aggressively. A small chat icon blinked in the corner of the map, a stylized speech bubble with a crack running through it. With trembling fingers, Leo tapped it. A dialog box opened, and a message typed itself out in sharp, impersonal font that seemed to burn into the screen. Hello, Emperor. We see your little farming game. Ready for a real challenge? The username next to the message was a string of glitching characters that eventually resolved into a single chilling word, Nullerbiter. Leo felt the balcony tilt beneath him. He gripped the stone edge, knuckles white. The air around the phone crackled, tiny motes of darkness bleeding from the screen and dissolving into reality like ink in water. The distant sound of temple hymns was swallowed by an unnatural stillness. Even the world tree's leaves had stopped their gentle rustling. Someone else was on the other end. Someone who knew about the app. Someone who had watched him tap Sunny Day and Mild Plague and Festival of Fools with all the naive innocence of a man playing a game. And now they wanted to play too. The words hung there, pulsing with a malevolent patience. Leo's mind raced. He had faced assassination plots, plagues, and divine glitches, but this was something far more terrifying, a challenge from a cosmic adversary who treated empires like a multiplayer lobby. He had no idea what the Null Order was capable of, but the map's hostile kingdom stretched across a continent, and his tiny green patch looked pitifully vulnerable. He thought of Cashin's words, a well-earned rest. The irony was bitter on his tongue. There would be no rest. Not now. His thumb, still shaking, hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 questions burned in his throat. Who are you? What do you want? How do I stop you? But he typed nothing. Instinct screamed at him not to reply, not to give this null arbiter any foothold in his mind or his empire. Yet the chat box remained open, unclosable, the cursor blinking like a patient executioner awaiting his confession. The empire was at peace, but beyond its borders, a far greater storm was gathering. And Leo, the clumsy god emperor, had just been invited to a game he never wanted to play.